Well, good morning and welcome, folks. I'm going to give everyone just a couple of minutes to get into the room. We have 1,154 people who registered for our online advocacy day today, and it takes just a moment for the system to get everyone into the room. So we're growing, we're over 400 people have jumped on so far, so give it just a moment for everyone to get settled in. If you're just joining us, I'm giving the system just a second to get everyone into the room. All right. Well, good morning and welcome, everyone. Welcome to the National Association of Social Workers Minnesota Chapter 2021 Social Work Online Advocacy Day. And Ramadan Mubarak to all of you celebrating Ramadan. I'm Karen Goodenough, a proud macro practice social worker and executive director at NASW Minnesota. Today we have, let's see, our final numbers are 499 practicing social workers joining us this morning, just about half of our audience. We have 576 students, 24 retired folks, 11 allied professionals, and a few of you who didn't say what you are, and that's totally fine too. So welcome to everyone for being with us today, our over 1,100 attendees. Please note right up front here too that if you have to leave us at some time during the day, or if you know friends and colleagues who would love to hear this message and hear all of the great content today, we are recording the day. It will be up on our YouTube channel by the end of this week. So please go ahead and look for that. So I just want to say also that this is really an awesome mix for an audience. We are so glad to have you all with us. We have been working for years as a chapter to grow the number of social workers, practicing social workers who are at our day at the Capitol, remembering that this is not Student Social Work Day at the Capitol, which many days at the Capitol are. It's mostly students. But the reality is for social workers, advocacy is core to all of our practice. It is part of our code of ethics. We are all called to do this work. And so this is our one day out of the year to come together, get caught up on the issues, and spend some time actually doing something about the things we care about. So as we start this day of advocacy, I want to acknowledge that the Minnesota Capitol is located within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. Land that was stolen by lawmakers under the guise of policy. Minnesota comes from the Dakota name for this region, Minnesota Makoche, translating to the land where the waters reflect the skies or cloudy waters. And I just love that. NASW Minnesota recognizes the original peoples of this place and is committed to making ongoing efforts to educate the community about the relationship that the Dakota people have to this area, both historically and today as they remain here in their home. I also want to recognize that our hearts are heavy this morning and this week in Minnesota. Our state has been struck once again with the tragic death of Daunte Wright, another Black life taken by police less than 10 miles from where the Chauvin trial is taking place. We stand at NASW Minnesota and mourn alongside our Black neighbors, the city of Brooklyn Center, and Daunte Wright's family and loved ones. We're shocked, but we are not surprised. And we're also not complacent. There is more work to be done until every person can truly live free to live in a safe and just society. This is all of our work as social workers and as human beings. Our chapter demands justice for Daunte Wright, his family and community, and accountability for the system that ended his young life. I also want to acknowledge this morning right away the hurt being felt by our Asian American community members, our LGBTQI and gender nonconforming folks who are victims of the awful, hurtful policies that are being discussed and passed around our country. In a moment, we'll hear some opening remarks from the chair of our Racial Justice Committee, who will help to frame the context for all of our work with a very purposeful lens and movement toward racial justice. As social workers, we each have work to do on this journey. And as a chapter, we definitely have work to do. And I hope that each of you will join me in recommitting purposefully each and every day to working towards social justice. Now, before we talk more about our plan for the day, I want to thank our sponsors for supporting this important day. By hosting this event online for the second year, we have made it free and accessible to all, but we still have expenses to cover. So I really appreciate these awesome social work programs for stepping up. Please join me in giving a huge thanks to our champion sponsor, the Minnesota State University of Mankato MSW program, our advocate sponsor, St. Mary's University of Minnesota MSW program, and our ally sponsors, the University of St. Thomas School of Social Work and the University of Wisconsin Eau Claire. We love our friends right across the border as well. Please check out the sponsor folders in our Google Docs for today to learn a ton of great information about each of these programs, especially their MSW program offerings for you BSW folks. Now, here's our agenda for today. It's a little different than in years past. So if you've been with us year after year, since we're not able to do a rally at the Capitol, we really want to incorporate this year policymakers into our morning. Today, we'll be welcoming 3 fantastic policymakers, 6 policy partners, and in between folks from our Social Policy Action Network, or our SPAN committee, we'll be covering a bunch of useful tips and tricks for engaging in policy work. Please note that the governor had planned to be with us today, but in light of what his office is calling the ongoing situation, which I completely appreciate in the Twin Cities, he had to cancel late yesterday. We're definitely disappointed, but we are excited to share that the DHS Commissioner, Jodi Harpstead, will be joining us in his stead. So in a little bit, we'll welcome Jodi. In future years, we do plan to host this event as a hybrid, offering the morning session like this virtually so we can continue to offer it for free and accessible to all, but then also hosting a rally at the Capitol and in-person meetings with legislators on a subsequent day. For this year, as you'll hear from Jenny in a moment, work at the Capitol is very different and we have had to adjust accordingly. So now, as you can see, there are no times on this page, but I promise you this was a very well-crafted and thoughtfully scheduled day that will keep your mind engaged. But note, we have a lot of ground to cover, so we'll keep moving for 3 full hours. Feel free to take care of yourselves, grab snacks, do what you need to do, but also know that we'll have 2 moments in the morning around each hour time where I'll be talking about things for a few minutes, and I'll let you know that this might be a good time to take a break if you need one. Please do your best to tune out the world for these 3 hours. I assure you, I know exactly how hard that can be in our Zoom world, but try to tune out the world. I promise you that we'll move quickly. And if you try to look at other things, you'll miss something important. Give yourself these 3 hours to really think about and chew on the issues of the day and what's currently happening at the Capitol and with our policy partners. In return, you'll get 3 free CEUs, and you'll also feel more ready to act, to reach out to your policymakers, as well as to speak thoughtfully about issues to your friends, your family, your colleagues, and your clients. Now, you are welcome to drop questions into the questions box. I can see over in the questions that people are already doing that. Beth will be watching for them. You'll meet her in a moment. And if there's time left after each presenter, we may have some time to post some questions. We may also have some time at the end of the morning, and if not, we will do our best to try to answer some of your questions via social media in the coming weeks. And finally, none of this matters. All that you learned this morning does not really matter if you don't do something with it. So my plea to you is that you'll hear many voices, many asks throughout the morning. Focus on what's most important to you. That's what legislators will respond to, your interest, your passion, and your knowledge. They are not experts in all things. They simply can't be. So try not to feel overwhelmed yourself. Just listen for what piques your interest and passion, and that will be what you need to take from today. So with that, I want to welcome 3 of our fantastic NASW leaders, Angela Flowers, Beth Winterfeld, and Jenny Arneson, to join me on the screen. First up to share a few comments and framing for the day is Angela Flowers, our board secretary and chair of our Racial Justice Committee. And Angela's here to share some racial justice framing for our policy work. Good morning, Angela. Thanks for being with us. Take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Karen, thank you for having me. As you said before, my name is Angela Flowers. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am the secretary of the NASW Minnesota chapter and the co-chair of its Racial Justice Committee. The committee was organized to address issues of racial injustice through a 4-point programmatic thrust of public education, member engagement, and legislative advocacy efforts. Since its inception in August 2020, the committee has designed, coordinated, and organized racial equity plans to advocate equitable systems change. And this work has included rewriting our chapter's value statements to include more active language and to recognize how intersectionality of identities may encompass overlapping systems of discrimination or disadvantage. To empower and support Black, Brown, Indigenous people of color in the creation and sustainment of policies that affect their communities, the chapter has partnered with the Black Social Workers Association and the Minnesota Hmong Social Workers Coalition to form what we're calling the Unity of Effort. The committee has demonstrated our commitment to decolonize social work practice through policy advocacy and legislative action. The Racial Justice Committee worked closely with the chapter's SPAN committee to apply an equity lens to the chapter's legislative agenda. The committee's involvement in that process was to analyze the impact of the design and implementation of policies on underserved and marginalized individuals and groups in order to identify and potentially eliminate barriers. The goal of the Racial Justice Committee is to transform and reimagine our communities by amplifying our collective voices. I would love to have those of you who are not yet members join us in our work to establish an anti-racist Minnesota through the dismantling of systems of oppression, including those perpetuated by social workers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angelo, for that framing. And next, I'd like to invite Beth to talk in just a second about our SPAN committee. Now at NASW Minnesota, we have 2 policy committees. We have our SPAN group that does our policy work, and then we have PACE that does our friend-making work. And so I'm going to describe just quickly what PACE does and then turn it over to Beth. PACE is our Political Action for Candidate Election Committee, and you will hear that word PACE several times throughout the morning because PACE is the group that endorses candidates for office. Now, the cool thing about this is what I call our friend-making work. So we have to support people running for office in order for us to know these folks, to know who aligns with our values and our ethics and the kinds of issues that we're working on. And so it's a really fun group of folks that gets to spend time with future policymakers and deciding who we're going to back. So you'll hear throughout the morning that word PACE and who we've supported as a chapter. And now, Beth, do you want to tell the folks a little bit about SPAN?
Yes, thank you, Karen. And thank you, Angelo, for your work and for your description of how Racial Justice Committee has also been working with SPAN. So SPAN is our social policy action network, and we are the vehicle that really leads the legislative launch development in collaboration this year for the first time with our newly formed Racial Justice Committee. And once that was developed, we sought final approval from both the Racial Justice Committee and the Board of Directors. So it was just a very collaborative effort across the board, lots of voices in the room and at the table in that development. So the legislative agenda frames and guides our work for the entire year. So that includes producing this event, writing policy briefs, putting out action alerts for our members and social workers throughout the state. We do a lot of policy education for the membership of our committee and also members at large. We had the legislative launch earlier this session, and we will have a legislative wrap up at the end. We also have ongoing visioning. So currently we have over 20 voices on our committee, which is about more than triple the size of last year. And so all of those voices in the room are really co-creating and working together to have a vision of what SPAN can be like moving forward. So we have, at this point, we feel endless possibilities and a lot of energy and excitement. So when we developed the legislative agenda this year, basically social workers want everything in there. And if we had everything in our legislative agenda, it would be hundreds of pages long. And if I got a document like that, I would not read it. And I don't know many people that would. So we're forced to really try to keep it as simple as we can, yet substantive, to fit on, you know, a 2-page document so that it can actually be useful. And we were really lucky this year to have Jenny, for the first time, a paid lobbyist working with us, so that we can both be grounded in our code of ethics, but a little bit more practical in prioritizing things so that they align with the legislative process and what's being done in this session. So having said that, our legislative agenda doesn't cover everything. And we have learned from some of our voices in the room, attending some of our events, that maybe there were some gaps this year. And so some members came forward and identified a couple of those gaps, one being issues of aging and issues that disability communities deal with. And so those voices have joined SPAN and are already doing some advocacy work so that that can be at the table next year. So we really encourage anybody who wants to have a voice to be at the table, to be part of those discussions. So if you have a particular passion, please contact me or Karen, and we'll get you on the list and invite you to join our committee next year. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks so much, Beth. All right, hopefully people are getting excited for what's happening this morning. Our real kickoff here now comes with Jenny Arneson. So Jenny is our contract lobbyist at the chapter, and she is also an MPS school board member. And I have to say that she's also a social worker. She is one of us, an MSW, and Jenny's here this morning to give us a little bit of introduction to what policy work has been like this year, some context of our current legislature and what it's like being virtual. And then Jenny will also introduce our first speaker for today. So Jenny, take it away.
Yes, thanks so much. Thank you all for having me here today, and thank you for joining us. I think we're going to hear just from a great lineup of speakers today, and as Beth alluded to, they're going to cover our broad legislative agenda, and all of them are going to offer different perspectives to share about their work at the Capitol. And I think this is going to be especially useful too, because as Karen just mentioned, the Capitol is a completely different place this year. In non-COVID years, lawmakers and the public move freely between each other. And so for advocates like us, that physical proximity allows organic conversation and relationship building, which is so central to our social work. So being in the room together also helps people solve problems, which is what policy is supposed to do. So this year, there are very limited in-person options, and no one from the public can be at the Capitol. Like the rest of the world, everything has been converted to streaming and online. In the House and the Senate, they weren't really set up for that. They switched to emergency mode last spring, and they spent this off season trying to expand their capacity, but their platforms aren't unlimited. So they share. And so you see them being creative with their scheduling, and with committees, they all have very hard deadlines, which clearly some of them are unaccustomed to doing. You hear them saying, okay, well, we only have 5 minutes left of this streaming service, so we have to finish up our comments, or we have to make a decision because we're running out of time and somebody else needs this account. Lawmakers, they need to share Zoom accounts, and some of them don't have access at all. So you may, particularly some of the newer members, you may reach out to your legislator and they may say, I don't have a Zoom or a different sort of online platform to meet. So it is challenging. The House in particular is adapting. Their communication services happens to be headed by someone with a TV production background. So you can see that in their streaming. Their videos are recorded and you can generally find them with just one click. The Senate does take more persistence to find, and generally what we're finding is that only the audio is recorded. The Senate is more in person than the House, but what that means is you have senators in a room speaking, but they sometimes forget to use their mic, and so then the audio is much poorer quality. So it can be difficult to follow. The other big challenge for people who follow very closely is the House and the Senate in particular was very accustomed to operating with paper only and not electronic. The Senate doesn't require that their senators offer their amendments in advance. So it allows them to kind of make amendments on the fly. And generally speaking, they were accustomed to just kind of passing that out in the room at the time. But without notice, it means they're not published. And so if you're watching from home, the supportive documents matching their amendments are lacking. And so it is much less transparent, and it's very difficult sometimes to follow along. So it is, most people would say that this session is a really challenging time to follow as the public, but also to engage. So where we're going to end this, though, is that they are required to pass. It is a big year, so this is problematic that it's difficult to follow. They are constitutionally required to pass a balanced budget by May 17th, which is really only in a few weeks. If you talk to Senate and House leaders, they remain optimistic. But most watching this session are skeptical that they're going to be able to do that. If they do not come to an agreement, a balanced budget, which means the House, the governor, and the Senate must all agree on the same budget by May 17th. If they're not successful, then they will need to call special sessions to resolve this. Multiple special sessions can be called, and they can go all the way up to July 1st before the government starts to shut down. That means that this year's budget will expire. If they do not have a new budget, then the government won't have a budget, and that's when you start to see shutdown. So they certainly will be motivated, if not by May 17th, but by July 1st. The reason people are skeptical about this ability to find compromise is, you may remember that the House is controlled by the Democrats and the Senate is controlled by the Republicans, and of course our governor is a Democrat. So we have, not only are their budgets very far apart, more importantly, their philosophies are very different. So for example, the House is very focused on, they've made a priority to pass earned, safe, and sick time. Well, Republicans in the House and Senate have indicated that they will never pass earned, safe, and sick time. Voting restrictions have been put forth by the Senate. School vouchers have been put forth by the Senate, and while the House has put a couple $100 million into public education, the Senate has suggested that they don't want really hardly anything put into public education, and they'd like to divert almost all their funding to private school vouchers. In addition, of course, there's an emerging public policy, public safety debate. The Senate hasn't heard one proposed bill, whereas the House has a variety of proposals. And ultimately, they have a completely different philosophy when it comes to taxes. The Senate has vowed that they will never raise taxes on anyone, whereas the House is suggesting that the highest income wage earners in Minnesota should pay more taxes. So throughout this day, by the end of today, you're going to be more familiar with all of these debates among lawmakers, and you're going to be ready to insert your voice into this process. We will hear a lot about this, and so this is kind of this sets us up for the day. And with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, and she's here to tell us a little bit about child welfare. Kirsten Anderson is from Aspire, Minnesota. They are an organization, association of agencies working to improve the lives of children, youth, and families, and they advocate regularly at the Capitol. Kirsten is here to share some of that work, including some changes in the child welfare policy. So thank you, Kirsten, for joining us.
Good morning, NASW. My name is Kirsten Anderson, and I'm Executive Director of Aspire Minnesota. Thanks very much for the introduction, Jenny. It is great to be with all of you. The world needs social workers, the world needs you, and Minnesota needs you. And as Jenny was explaining about the legislature, every year, legislators lean heavily on experts like yourselves to help chart the course for their districts and for policy areas that they are deeply committed to personally. And so your presence is important every year, and especially this year, as there's been far less contact with constituents, with advocates, and with lobbyists who help to guide the course of the conversation within the legislative body. And, you know, I think everyone is really missing that humanity. This is an incredibly person and paper-driven process. And so it is really incredible that we're as far in the process as we are. I think that we're all really grateful that we're not dealing with a budget deficit as we anticipated at the beginning of the session. And so it's a lot to be celebrated at this point. The one thing I would really encourage you, as you heard earlier this morning, is take some time to get to know your legislators. Build those relationships. They are anxious to be aligned with the interests of their constituents, and they, just like you and I, are walking in this world interested in building those relationships, learning about one another. And so certainly your policy recommendations are important, but so is your story and you as a person. And so please don't forget that that is a really critical element. Oftentimes our elected officials go on to other offices, so those relationships can bear out in multiple ways. So as Jenny mentioned, Aspire Minnesota is an association of children's service providers. I am really honored to be the executive director of the association, and the work of the association is in both our advocacy work, training and support for leadership development, and we also have the nation's longest running outcome evaluation system for children and youth in care. So I'm honored to be with you this morning. I was invited to talk about Family First Prevention Services Act, and then I see that I have an invitation to speak a little bit more broadly about child welfare policy, so I will do a little bit of both. So Family First Prevention Services Act is the most significant reform in our federal child welfare policy in a generation. Passed in February of 2018, it includes a tremendous number of required steps for implementation within the states. And implementation is fully required by October 1st or September 30th, no matter how you slice it, of 2021. So we are on a race to implement. And this bill includes a lot of good concepts. It also presents a lot of challenges for states for implementation. I think very broadly, it does two really fundamental things. One is that it seeks to constrain the use of Title IV-E federal child welfare funds on the treatment and residential care side of things. And then it also seeks to open up eligibility for Title IV-E for the purposes of, quote, prevention services. The challenge of the prevention services part, though, is that to be eligible for those resources, you have to be a, quote, candidate for foster care as defined by each state. We also are required as a state to draw down existing practices from an evidence-based practice clearinghouse established by the federal government. Now that clearinghouse has been fairly disappointing in its arrival. Positively, it is drawing in more and more practices. But as we know, our evidence-based practice array has not historically been inclusive of practices that have been researched and studied and developed by a wide variety of communities. And so there are a whole host of challenges with the clearinghouse, and we really do hope to press forward to have more and more practices included. So this federal requirement requires a tremendous amount of administrative response from our Department of Human Services and our counties who are implementing the law, as well as legislative alignment for full implementation. So never has it been in question whether or not we will seek to be in compliance with this law, because our Title IV-E child welfare resources are really significantly important to the state of Minnesota. What has been up for discussion this legislative session is how exactly we do that. So the legislation brought forward by Senator Bingham in the Senate and Representative Noor in the House is really about federal compliance to that residential treatment, residential care side of things, renaming our residential care Qualified Residential Treatment Program, or QRTPs. And so we're setting a new standard called QRTP, aligned with the federal requirements, and creating 3 exception clauses to that standard for young people in need of that residential treatment, residential care response. And so Aspire Minnesota, the Department of Human Services, NAMI, and MACSA have been in lots of hours of conversations about how to best shape the language moving forward. And I can say that both House and Senate have language in their human service omnibus bills that positively reflect this important alignment with our federal law. The Senate language does include a little bit more heft to it, so we prefer that Senate language, allowing for some more amendments that reflect some needed changes as it relates to implementation in ways that really set us on good standing to be able to fully implement into the future, including being able to fully understand the costs to our system, both for the state, for our counties who are holding a lion's share of the responsibility for reshaping how our processes work, and for providers who are now providing this new QRTP level of care or exception to that level of care. I also just want to take the other piece that we've been talking a lot about is honoring family and youth voice. One of the very, very positive things that has emerged in this conversation is, as part of honoring family and youth voice, we are now working on what's been called the third path for access to treatment for kiddos in need of residential level of mental health treatment. So currently, we have a voluntary placement statute that allows for families to place children in need of that level of care, and that flows through our child protection, child welfare system, and allows for parents to retain full custody of their children, but that will no longer be continued to be allowed with implementation of Family First. So a third path has emerged in the conversation that would allow for us to build our mental health system with a behavioral health option, a mental health option for parents in need and families in need of this level of care to place their children without having to be in the midst of the rigor of a child welfare system that is responding to different criteria for children and families. So that is very, very positive. We're really thrilled about that opportunity to both create a positive solution to what otherwise would be a set of requirements for families that they don't want, frankly, and also to build our behavioral health care, our mental health system, as we are dedicated to doing as we move into the future. So that third path is a really, really positive thing, and we're grateful for that. I did want to take just a little bit of a step back as it relates to Family First. We have here a little bit of a philosophical challenge in that the authors and the proponents of some of the elements of Family First really see treatment, residential care, as anathema to what we want for our kids. Meanwhile, we have ongoing conversations, endless conversations about the need for our children to be able to access care in circumstances where they have that level of need. And so here we have a bit of a clash. And our goal is really to build both systems, build our child welfare and response system, build our mental health system to the betterment of all kids and families. So moving forward, well, I guess one other thing to say about the prevention services is that we are really pleased that the Department of Human Services has come out with an initial set of prevention services to be included in our proposal moving forward that is more inclusive than not, despite some of the challenges that they face. Just a couple of other things to celebrate on the child welfare front. After 3 years of attempt, the foster care licensing bill has been included in both packages in the Senate and the House. We're thrilled about that. That will further calibrate adoption, licensing, and foster care licensing, and with a fundamental outcome of allowing for more relative caregivers to have access to that foster care licensing, which is a critical continued reform in our system. The other piece is a parent representation bill that exists in both sides, which we again are thrilled about. I also wanted to highlight that Foster Advocates, an organization that is fairly new in our sphere, has successfully had in the Senate higher education bill funding that will allow for young people in care to access education, access higher education moving forward. And finally, really want to call your attention to federal changes that have allowed for young people in foster care to return for care and sustain those benefits just due to the pandemic and the acknowledgement of need for that foster youth formerly in and currently, as they are aging out of foster care, continue to need. So I hope you have your pens out and are marking down these things. A lot of good work that's been happening here, and really encourage you to build those relationships, enjoy your time with legislators, and continue with your loud voices for advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us this morning, Kirsten, and for always sharing such fantastic insights with our audience. You did talk about a lot of big stuff that's happening. So the good news is we did record this morning. So people who are really all about child welfare related issues might go back and listen to that one more time to get their heads in the game. And they can also check out Aspire Minnesota's website for more information. So thank you so much again, Kirsten. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
All right, folks, up next, we are going to move into, I'm going to just share one little tidbit, and then I'm going to introduce Nancy Fitzsimmons. So first up, I want to make sure everyone understands that representation in Minnesota, as Jenny described briefly earlier, is organized into legislative districts. So each district has 1 senator and 2 reps. And so there are 2 reps, but only one of those represents you. So we're commonly referred to as like the A side or the B side of the geographic area. So for example, I live in District 5B. So I have to look at which House member is the B side of my area. So 67 senators, 67 Senate districts, 134 representatives, all right? Now, these maps represent our folks, and Jenny did talk about, you know, who's in control of the House, who's in control of the Senate. I think it is very interesting to look across our state to see also where the Democrats live and where the Republicans live generally. Again, that's very much a generalization, but the map also tells that story. So I think it's an interesting piece to the whole frame for Minnesota conversation. So next up, I want to hear from Nancy Fitzsimmons from MSU Mankato about how to find who represents you and some tips to follow their work. This is so important. So take it away, Nancy.
Great, thank you, Karen. So we're going to do an interactive learning opportunity here. So let's find out who represents you. So if you already know, excellent. If not, there is no time like the present. The picture on the screen is a screenshot of the Minnesota State Legislature's homepage. What I want you to do is to go to www.leg.mn.gov, okay? And if you're not going to do this now, make sure you do this as soon as we are done with this, with our Advocacy Day. But please go there, and along the very bottom, you will see the words "Contact your legislator," and below that are the words "Who represents me." So if you're at www.leg.mn.gov, right, and click on "Who represents me." Next slide. Okay, so what should appear if you've gone to and clicked on "Who represents me" is an image that looks something like the one on the screen, except now you need to enter your street address, city, state, and zip code, right, in that box there sort of towards the left, and then click on the search icon for your representatives to appear. So what you see is my screenshot when I went and did this. So we're going to walk through the images. Starting on the bottom to the top, you should see Senator Tina Smith. I know she's not in the picture. She did make the snipping tool. With her DFL party affiliation, you'll see Senator Amy Klobuchar with her DFL party affiliation. You'll see your U.S. House representative with both party affiliation and your congressional district number. So you see mine is Jim Hagedorn. He's a Republican from CD1, Congressional District 1. Next, you will find your Minnesota senator with party affiliation, district number, and finally your House representative with party affiliation and district number. So you can see that I live in District 19A. My state representative is Susan Ackland. She's a Republican. My state senator is Nick Friends. He is a Democrat. Okay. Then you'll see the little icon, the little click there, the little box that says contact. Click on one of the 2 state representatives, whichever one you are interested in learning more about. Next slide. So on the screen is what appeared when I clicked on the contact link for Senator Nick Friends. Not exactly like this, but pretty much like this. So we're going to walk through a few important things to note. First, you're going to see that my senator, state senator, is the assistant minority leader. That tells me he's in a leadership position, but in the minority status because the Republicans control the Minnesota Senate. Okay. Next, I see his contact information including a link to subscribe to his listserv. And sometimes people have that link and it'll say email updates. To get regular updates from your representatives, you sign up by clicking on their subscribe to my listserv or email update links. If you're following along, do that right now. Also on the page, if you keep looking down on the left-hand side, you'll see committee assignments. You want to pay attention to the committee assignments because these are the policy areas that your representatives will know the most about and spend the majority of their time working on during session and outside of session as well. You also find information about the bills they authored and co-authored, the length of service, and biographical information, and that's on the right-hand side. Knowing all of this information can be really beneficial for your advocacy. Lastly, notice the information about legislative assistant. Again, we're going back to the right side of or left side of the screen. This is a really good person to know. Okay, for example, I scheduled for Senator Friends to come to one of my social work classes this Saturday directly through Justin Emmerich, Senator Friends' legislative assistant. Next slide. So I encouraged you, right, to subscribe to your state representatives' listservs or email updates. So this is the image on the screen is just a snippet of an email update that I received from Senator Friends last week. This is one way I stay connected with my representatives. And there are other ways to do this as well. Follow on social media, attend virtual or town hall meetings. I typically find out about town hall meetings through the email updates. Attending a town hall is a really great way to educate others in your community about the issues, as well as your state senator or representatives, and to hear about the issues that are important to people in your community. You should also consider inviting representatives to meet with groups or organizations you are affiliated. Of course, call, email, post, and write letters, including sending messages of gratitude for policy positions and votes on the issues that you support. It's also really beneficial to connect outside of the legislative session. This is a good time to talk with your representatives about the issues that you care about, perhaps even to get them to author a piece of legislation. Finally, one of the best ways to educate and influence your representatives is to volunteer to help on their election or re-election campaigns.
Thanks so much, Nancy. All right, thanks for all of those tips. So helpful to hear from people who are busy actually doing this connection work with their policymakers. And so hopefully you learned some new things from Nancy. So this morning, lots of you in the chat are saying, where's the schedule? Who's talking next? How do I know who the speakers are? Early in the slides, I covered just the overview of who our presenters are this morning. In just a moment, I'm going to welcome Angela Tona to our virtual stage here. So Angela, if you want to go ahead and get ready, but I want to let everyone know that we have to go with the flow. So lots of our legislators and other presenters have things going on at the Capitol right now. So for example, Athena Hollins was supposed to be next up. Athena is not able to make it yet this morning. And so if she can get here, we will circle back to Athena. But in the meantime, I want to welcome Angela Tona. So next, we are going to hear from this really awesome close partner of the NASW Minnesota, Angela Tona from OutFront Minnesota. She currently works to support the LGBTQ plus community to ban conversion therapy throughout Greater Minnesota. She received her BSW at Nazareth College of Rochester, New York, and her MSW and Masters of Public Policy at the University of Minnesota. So we love having another social worker in our midst. And thanks so much for being with us this morning. Take it away, Angela.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Great. Hello, thank you so much for having me. Like Karen said, my name is Angela Tona. I use she, her pronouns, and yeah, I support communities building policies that work towards LGBTQ equity. I want to share a content warning that I will be talking about suicide and murder today. I wanted to first and foremost share some gratitude in acknowledging that NASW Minnesota just deemed conversion therapy as unethical. This harmful and discredited practice has claimed the lives of millions of LGBTQ people. It's a poor attempt at changing a person's sexual or gender identity based on the false pretense that being LGBTQ+ is a mental illness and can be cured. The fact that social workers were able to practice this non-evidence-based practice, whose survivors hold lifelong post-traumatic stress and attempt suicide at a rate of nearly 3 to 1, is horrifying. This is coming during a time, during one of the most violent legislative sessions towards LGBTQ+ people in modern history. We saw anti-transgender legislation uniformly pop up in over half of the country. In our state, we introduced the first bill in the nation that would specifically criminalize transgender youth for using bathrooms and participate in school activities. Further, our own state representatives have called for amendments to explicitly exclude transgender people from being able to seek justice for hate crimes against them, even when rates of the murder of Black trans women are rising annually. Please believe me when I say that this legislation is not anything less than an attempt to erase LGBTQ people. It is not far-fetched to claim that using these therapy and criminalization tactics to erase integral identities is nothing short of an attempt at modern-day white supremacist eugenics. This is abhorrent. We as social workers must be at the forefront of holding these legislators accountable, especially at a time when these same legislators are ignoring advocate calls for reforms to the criminal legal system that during a time when our Black and brown neighbors are being incarcerated at higher rates in our state than anywhere else in the country, and when our Black neighbors are continuously being murdered by the police with no accountability. Now is the time to come together, step up together, and use our collective power to hold people accountable to our needs, our clients' needs, and our neighbors' needs. We as social workers are doing nothing ethical if we aren't also dismantling the systems that put our clients in oppressive circumstances in the first place. Okay, I said a lot. There's a lot of work to do, but I want to specifically ask you to advocate for these bills that are in our current session. Please take a pen or type this into your phone. When you're advocating, please discuss how awful House File 1657 and Senate File 96 are, as these are the bills that bar and criminalize transgender youth for participating in sports and using locker rooms. There is a chance that these might be added to an educational omnibus, so please make sure that you say that they should not be included in the omnibus. Further, please encourage your legislators to sign on to Senate File 1871 and House File 2156. Again, that's Senate File 1871 and House File 2156, which bans conversion therapy for licensed practitioners in the entire state for youth and vulnerable adults. And actually, Representative Hollins is carrying the bill in the House, which is great. Also, please encourage your legislators to sign on to House File 1097. And this stops formerly incarcerated people from going back to prison on technical violations of parole and probation rather than new crimes. Currently, over half of the people that are released from incarceration are sent back to prison for breaking a rule rather than committing a new crime. LGBTQ people, and especially queer, trans, Black, Indigenous people of color, experience incarceration at extremely high rates, so this would move mountains towards the anti-violent world that we deserve. Thank you so much. I said a lot, and I really appreciate being here, and I appreciate your time, and I will hopefully be able to answer questions in the chat. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Angela. You are really an important partner and an important voice in this work. And so I hope people heard you this morning as well. So I'm really excited that we have one of our legislators in the midst here this morning. So in just a couple of minutes, we're going to introduce Aric Putnam. So Aric, just a heads up, but we're going to cover a couple of things first before we move to that. We're going to take a little brief break, probably after we hear from Senator Putnam. So first up, when you are actually, I'm going to let Jenny do this. Jenny.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Karen.
Take it away.
Yeah, and thank you, Angela and Kirsten and OutFront Minnesota and Aspire Minnesota for being here and helping us today. I just want to take about 30 seconds here to give you some tips for once you're writing your legislator. We want to make sure that you want to get your message across, and there's a few kind of do's and don'ts that are pretty common. The first and really important thing to remember is when you write somebody who's representing you, you want to be clear right away that you live in their district. And in fact, you will get an auto response from many representatives saying, if you didn't include your address, please make sure you do so. So make sure you just go ahead and in your first sentence, identify yourself as somebody who lives in that area. And of course, we'd like you to include that you're a social worker as well. And we want you to make it personal. There are a lot of groups that suggest that provide form letters to inspire you and to give you some ideas, and that's fine. But you do want to make sure that you kind of can insert something, if you have time to insert something personal, that is much more useful to representatives. Karen mentioned earlier, I serve on a local school board, and it's fine. We hear from letters, but it's always more interesting when somebody provides a little bit of context of why this matters to them. And do not forget to proofread the email. I get a lot of emails that people use as a template, but they forget to delete all the kind of insert this here. So it really just demonstrates that they've taken almost no time to write, and that does kind of send the message that maybe that you're not especially interested in the issue. Do not send snail mail right now. In fact, many representatives and senators are not at the Capitol, as we established earlier, so it's just going to take a long time for them to get your message if you try and use the Postal Service right now. And finally, speak really passionately about your policy issue, but you don't need to insult, you don't need to call names. Myself, and I've talked to a lot of elected officials this year who've talked a lot about just the increase of abusive engagement that they have received. And if you think about it, when you're trying to persuade somebody or someone's trying to persuade you and they start calling you a name, you're probably not very likely to listen to them. And it's the same here. You should be passionate about the topic, but you don't need to be abusive in your engagement. So with that, we're going to turn it over here to Senator Putnam, and we're just really excited to have him here today. He was PACE endorsed, and he took office just this past January, and he won a very close election that required a recount. And his victory meant that his St. Cloud seat flipped from Republican to Democrat. He's a professor at St. John's University and the College of St. Benedict, and he brings that experience to the Higher Education Committee, along with serving on the Aging and Long-Term Care Committee and Jobs and Economic Growth Committee. He's led on a number of bills this session, including a focus on voter expansion and, not surprisingly, education bills. So we're just thrilled to have him, and he ran just a great campaign and is just a very joyful person. So we're happy to have you here today, Senator. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I really, really appreciate the opportunity to hang out with you guys. And also, I got in a little bit early, so it's nice to hear your advice for contacting legislators. I would just briefly add, please, no all caps. Messages in all caps are not especially useful for anyone. And that advice that you were given about including your address is also incredibly important. We get tons and tons of correspondence, and I'll have to admit that I do prioritize things from people who are in my community. We get calls and emails from all over the country, and I'm not really all that concerned about what people feel like in Florida, but I do care a great deal about St. Cloud. So if you can put your address in your correspondences with your legislators, that's a really good idea. Now, thanks again for showing up today, all of you, and for showing up every day. I don't know a ton about social work, to be honest. I don't think many people do, but I've got good friends who are in the social work biz, great friends who do social work. But I gotta be honest, I don't know what they do on a Tuesday, but I do know that I appreciate it and I care about it. And then I think it's really important, so much so that I think that social work is also a lot like democracy. I think the challenges that one faces as a social worker are very similar to the challenges that we face when we get into electoral politics. But I also think, and this is just as important, that social work can teach us a lot about how we ought to do democracy. So I think that by and large, like democracy, social work is probably sometimes a thankless job. I bet there's a really good chance that you don't get a thank you card from every single person that you help, from every bit of work that you do. But I also think there's an even better chance that you don't expect that thanks, that you do that work because you're doing it for something greater, something more important, something bigger than yourself. And that is what democracy needs to be about too. And you do that every day, and I appreciate that. But sometimes I bet that work is also pretty difficult, in that what you do, just like democracy, is uncertain. You can pour your heart out, you can work incredibly hard for someone and still not know that the result for that person will be what you both need. That's difficult too. But the same is true with democracy. You can work incredibly hard on something that you believe deeply in and not have control over the result, but you do have control over the process. In electoral politics and in your work every day, you can be committed to the skills and the energy and the investment that you need to do. But not having control over that result can also be exhausting, just like in democracy. You can show up every day, you can do the work of social work, you can work for other people, not knowing what that result is going to be, but you still have to invest your intelligence, your care, your creativity, your emotion. And you know, one of the things that bugs me about the world these days is I think that we don't respect work anymore. We don't respect the work that goes into doing work. To be a good social worker, just like to be skilled in politics, requires doing the work to know how to do it better. You know, it seems like nowadays, just as a corollary, like we'll let anybody teach. If you listen to the radio, you can teach music in an elementary school nowadays. And we're probably not far from thinking that you just have to be a nice guy to be a social worker. These are troubling trends. And I think that just like with democracy, we need to respect the work that goes into being a social worker, the skills that you need to develop, and the investments that you make. But I also think that social work can teach us a little bit about how we ought to do democracy. See, in the world that we're in right now, citizenship has to be a hell of a lot more than a piece of paper. It has to be more than your identity. It has to be what you do. I think we need to start thinking about citizen as a verb, as the things that we do, the activities that we engage in. It's about caring for something that's bigger than you. It's about caring for people you don't know and never will know, but still working on their behalf. It's about showing up every day, not just on the first Tuesday in November. It's about developing the skills and the intention and the purpose in order to be effective in the things that matter to you. Social work does these things. You are already phenomenal citizens every day you show up for work. And I think the rest of us can learn that for you, from us, from you. So I want to thank you for letting me hang out with you guys a little bit today, for letting me visit with you. But I also want to thank you for showing up every day, because you are model citizens in what you do already. And the rest of us and democracy could learn a lot from how you do what you do. So thanks for letting me be here, and thanks for being you.
Thank you so much for being with us, Senator Putnam. Those remarks about democracy and our work in general, I mean, I think every social worker needs a pep talk every day, but a reminder of how our work is really aligned in this larger democratic process of our world that we're living in, I think is really timely also. So thank you for that. Just before you leave us, my question, you know, it was a super tight race for you, and that had to be I don't know, I would say a stressful moment, I would guess, in your life, maybe. My question for you is also, what can we do to help you to ensure that it doesn't go quite that way the next time around as well? What can we do to support you and and get the word out as well. We're going to talk about voting in a little bit, but tell us a little bit about that process.
Oh, I totally appreciate that. But the one thing before I actually go into the answer is I'd say don't commit to supporting me yet. Make me work.
Got it. I love it.
I appreciate it. I really do. But when it comes down to it, I've never done this before. This is a new job for me. And when you start a new job, no matter how powerful your intentions are or how skilled you are to do it, in the context of democracy, I think we should always withhold a little bit of our enthusiasm until the people earn it. So first, let me earn it first. But if I do, I could really use some help. So yeah, it was a close election, but there are some other variables that popped into that. So my predecessor won the election in 2016 by 143 votes. I ended up winning by 315 votes. So it was a switch of about 500 votes, which is still pretty close. But I didn't door knock. To me, like I was just saying before, democracy is about respect. And if you don't know what's going on behind someone's door and their attitude towards public health, you do not knock their door. So I didn't knock a single door, which was a pretty substantial hindrance. Also, St. Cloud State wasn't in session. I'm in the teaching biz and I usually do pretty well with college students, but there were none of them living in the district because they weren't in the dorm because of that stuff. We figure that I probably lost close to, I didn't lose, I lost the opportunity to earn probably around 700 votes because of COVID in that context. And also, as you guys might know, we had a weed candidate who was recruited by the GOP to complicate the vote, and he got almost 8% of the vote. So those are things that I think are specific variables in my race. But when it comes to helping, I think just being engaged and putting pressure where it needs to be and not waiting for election season. That's really important too. Help me become a better advocate for the things that you care about. Help me earn your support. But also you can sort of follow what we do a little bit. That's kind of helpful. Our official Facebook page is supposed to be a space for community conversations. If I get trolled on it, I don't like to respond in that context, but if other people do, that's pretty helpful. When you see things that other people are doing that you don't like, just become active. I mean, I really do generally believe, I think of everything I just said, I believe, sincerely. And so to me, if you are advocating for right causes, and I am on the right side of those causes, we will win. So I would just encourage you to do that. That would be really helpful. And if I'm on the wrong side of those causes and I lose, that's on me. So when you keep fighting for the things that you care about, when you keep forwarding the narratives about industries of care, this is something I think that is incredibly important, is we need to start thinking differently about the industries of taking care of each other, of which social work is one of them. If that can become more top of mind for more people, I am more likely to get elected. And then I'm more likely to be in a position where I can make changes so that we can actually respect that work a little bit better and help you do it instead of getting in the way.
Well, I think that that energy and insight that you bring to your work is exactly what we need at the Capitol right now. And I want to say a couple things. One is those of you in the audience, we have Aric just over right around 800 attendees at the moment. People, a few that are jumping in. And I know it feels like it's just you and I talking right now, but it's not. Yeah, we had almost over 1,100 register for today, and at the moment we're at just about 800. So those of you in the audience who are in the St. Cloud area, this is your senator. Like, this is the energy that you get, that you have at your fingertips for conversation, for relationship. I heard you say, Senator, that you don't know the answers to all of the things, and you might actually need some of us to fill you in on some things that are affecting folks and based on what's happening in our world. So I really appreciate that energy. I think that if that was the energy of all of our lawmakers, that would be helpful. I want to say just one more thing about freshman legislators, folks. We give people a lot of time in the world to settle into jobs. We do not give our legislators that time. It takes, research has shown, like, it can take like a year to learn your job, to like figure it out, to get through a full cycle of it, figure out what that is, and like be really effective in it. And so Senator Putnam's been in office for a handful of months. my guess is people are like expect you to be doing everything exactly right in all the right ways, and you don't even know where the bathroom is maybe because you haven't even been to the Capitol. So I just want to, give that framing to our audience as well, that this is a hard job. And my guess is your faculty role didn't train you for all of the things you need to know to be a legislator also. So any wisdom you want to share with the group about that learning curve?
Well, I would say first that there are actually a lot more commonalities with faculty and legislators than one would hope, because there's a lot of drama in both contexts.
Okay.
And ego. But no, that's totally right. I can't tell you how grateful I am to hear that. Not just because I haven't started a new job in 20 years, and you're absolutely right. Like even finding the parking garage is kind of an adjustment.
Absolutely.
You're trying to figure out the rest of the stuff. And the Senate is an incredibly hierarchical, traditional space. Here's a little bit of quick gossip, if I can indulge just for a second. Do you guys know
Please do.
the Minnesota Senate is the only legislative body in the entire country where instead of sitting Democrats on the left and Republicans on the right, they sit minority in the front and majority in the back.
Wow.
You're not allowed to turn around. So you have to always be focused toward the front, which is why the majority is in the back, because they can see everything that's going on and they can say horrible stuff about you and you can't turn around and talk to them about it.
Wow.
Isn't that a trip?
That is fascinating insight.
Isn't that wild? There are little things like that you have to learn in this job. But there's a bigger issue too that you brought up that I think is really important. And also thank you for not telling me how many people were here before I started speaking, because that would have freaked me out.
You're welcome.
But the other thing that's really important about this is this whole notion of politics is transactional. And this is going to sound defensive, and it's not, but I'm not here to do errands for you. I'm here to work with you. And I think sometimes people think I can just tell my politician to go do something and make it happen, and it's going to happen. That's one, not true, but it's two, it's not a healthy understanding of democracy. Especially, I would say, as a freshman in the minority, in terms of actual legislative power, obviously I have all of it. I'm incredibly powerful as a freshman in the minority. No, I can't just say, oh, I want this bill for my social worker friends, let me make it happen. That's not really an option, and it's not how these things work, but it's sometimes how we expect things to work. So your plea for patience with me as I get adjusted here, because I'm incredibly grateful for that, because I need it. But I also think we need to think about what we expect from our legislators and our politicians more generally. No sustainable change happens because a politician made it happen. Sustainable change happens because the people and the politician work together to make the change.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. What a great final comment there also. Thanks so much for being with us this morning. Senator Putnam, it's great to know you, and good luck with the rest of the session. Just want to give you some good vibes to get through these last days and weeks ahead. We look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Take care, everybody.
Take care. All right, social workers of Minnesota, I'm going to take just a few minutes. And this is one of those moments where I told you I would tell you this is a good break time. But I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes about some events happening at NASW Minnesota and a few little tips and tricks that we did not get to along the way. So let me find the right slide here. Sorry, I went too fast. And we do have Commissioner Harpstead ready in the wings, and I just wanted to verify for everyone. So if you take a break, be back by 10:15 so you can hear from Commissioner Harpstead. So for the next few moments, again, just a few things that I think are really helpful for folks to know about. I know there's been lots of questions in the chat about some of our events, free CEUs people are looking for, those sorts of things. So I'm going to talk about those for a couple of minutes. And just a reminder to use the chat if you have questions about documents, about a Senate file, about a house number, or something that one of the speakers was talking about. We have people in the background who are answering your questions and directing you to the right resources. Please note also that our presenters didn't give us all of the materials for all of the things they were talking about today. Many of these items are moving targets. And so Jenny will be talking about in a little bit how to track legislation and things that you care about. And so if you don't already know how to look for the legislation itself, we'll talk about that in a little bit this morning. So here are on your slide a few upcoming events at NASW Minnesota. So we are your professional association. Remember that NASW is the National Association of Social Workers. It has about 120,000 members nationwide. In Minnesota, of those 120,000, we have about 2,000 members. Now, mind you, there are 16,000 licensed social workers in Minnesota. So I know there are a whole bunch of you in this room who need to join. So here are some things that are coming up for us. I hope you will all join us in May. May 14th from 9 to noon is our first annual Minnesota Social Work Summit. Our topic for this year is creating an anti-racist Minnesota together. And we put this event together in conjunction with the Black Social Work Association and the Hmong Social Work Coalition of Minnesota. And it's really meant to be a day where we don't hear from speakers. We don't learn more things about being anti-racist. We don't think more about our own selves as racist or anti-racist beings, because so many of us are doing so much learning and thinking and that sort of thing. But what we're hearing from folks is they're ready to start thinking about what are we going to do differently. And so this day will not be about us or any presenter telling you what to do. It will be about you all creating that space together and thinking about what we are going to collectively do differently. So it is really a movement making space. It will be an active work group kind of thing. So you will be, if you join us, you'll be doing work that day and coming up with the content. So it will be a fun and engaged morning as well from 9 to noon on May 14th. Also 3 CEUs. Just a note for that event, we made it very affordably priced, as very affordable as we could, and we also added a pay what you can rate. So if you're not able to pay anything, then that's okay too. Just a note that we have some ethics training coming up. We always try to do ethics training usually monthly or at least every other month. So if you're trying to get those ethics CEUs, we have an interesting one coming up on May 4th that I'll be presenting on 10 ethical questions to ponder in 2021. We've also put together a new supervision series, the essentials of supervision and the advanced supervision. If you take them together, either in a row or separate, because we're going to offer them several times a year, that includes those, or makes up those 30 hours that you need to be a licensed supervisor. So we just did a pilot, our first round of this brand new curriculum for the new series that was developed by social workers for social workers by myself and a couple of our awesome board members. And it was a really fantastic series. So we still have a few spots available for that. It is virtual. The days go by really fast. People had really fantastic things to say about it. So I hope if you're looking for those supervision CEs that you will look for that. I'm also putting together a 6-hour supervision training for June that has not been announced yet. So if you're still looking for just those 6 hours for the coming year, you are maybe look for that one coming up as well. Here are some free things for NASW members. We have a Lunch and Learn webinar the first Wednesday of every month. It is low cost for non-members, but always free for members. I also host, along with some of my board members who are awesome, Supervisor Consultation Circle once a month on the 3rd Thursday for a couple of hours. 2 free CEs. You can count for your supervision CEs or general. A really fun way to get some CEUs by doing consultation with other social workers. We also help match people with supervisors. So if you are looking to get connected with supervisees or you're looking for a supervisor, please reach out to our office. We also do lots of career and leadership development opportunities. We had more people nominate themselves or one another for the board than ever that I know of in the history of the chapter. It was really an exciting nominations process. Our nominations committee is working on the preparation for our ballot that should be coming out next week to members. But there's always opportunities to join our committees and work groups as well. Every month, we also send out a monthly newsletter packed with resources and policy updates and all sorts of things. So if you're a member and you're not getting that, please reach out to our office and let's figure out why you're not receiving that. It is an e-newsletter. And if you aren't yet a member, I think it's a really great resource to stay in touch with your social work community and what's going on. For members, we also always have free ethics and legal consultation. You can call me for ethics consultation, legal questions, and anything I can't answer, I will send you to folks at our national office who are poised to do that as well. So really great resources to help with those things. So it is 10:15. I am going to come back to a couple of these little tidbits we didn't touch on yet, but it is time to welcome our Commissioner of DHS. So Jodi Harpstead, I think, is in the audience. There's Jodi. Thanks so much for being with us this morning, Jodi. As I said earlier, folks, Governor Walz was unable to join us today and asked that our Commissioner of DHS join us instead. And I think that was actually a fantastic idea because Jodi's been in their position for, what, about a year and a half now, Jodi? Something like that? And I haven't heard from you since getting in that position, but I'm really excited to hear a bit more about what your department's current legislative priorities are and what's going on in terms of Mfip and all sorts of things. And as an aside, I know Jodi and her partner Stan from a nonprofit board that's near and dear to our hearts, PCYC and the Capri Theater in North Minneapolis. So it's fun to have you with us today in that space as well. So thanks so much, Jodi, for being with us this morning. And I'll give you about 10 minutes or so to take it away.
Well, thank you, Karen, and good morning to everyone. Governor Walz sends regrets that he couldn't be here with you today with the things that are weighing heavily on his mind this week. The governor was pleased to declare March Social Work Month in Minnesota, and I'm honored to be here with you in this space. My predecessor at Lutheran Social Service, Mark Peterson, an MSW, and his wife, Mary, an LICSW, and career school social worker, returned to Minnesota decades ago from their then home in Michigan for their St. Olaf College reunion. On their way home, they discussed what they had experienced and summed it up with their observation that Minnesotans believe that we have a responsibility to care for one another, and that when we apply ourselves, we can make things right. You are the personification of that description of Minnesota. The work you do to support your neighbors in Minnesota to live full lives in community is vital. The social work profession has worked to strengthen the well-being and meet the basic needs of all people who need support for more than a century, and you've worked to make our society a better place for all of us to live. This profession's been instrumental in pushing for major social reforms, including Social Security, the minimum wage, equal rights for all. And this is why I'm encouraged to see all of you here engaged in the lawmaking process at the state level. One of the social reforms the governor, lieutenant governor, and I are eager to see happen this year are changes to the Minnesota Family Investment Program, Mfip. After the Walz-Flanagan administration worked to pass the first increase in the Mfip cash benefit in 35 years, 2 years ago, I've had the opportunity to observe how the Mfip program worked during COVID. I've talked with recipients who told us about their already complex lives trying to make things work, finish schooling, get better jobs, who are grateful that during COVID, we've twice been able to extend Mfip benefits for 6 months without all the monthly paperwork required to stay in the program. The governor's budget includes the provision to make a version of this waiver permanent, which would make Minnesota the last state in the union to do so, matching up the review timeframes for county workers for Mfip, housing supports, and SNAP food benefits. While of course it would take us some time to reprogram our systems to extend the Mfip benefit, the governor's budget also includes a $750 one-time cash benefit to Mfip families to support them until we can implement our design change, and an ongoing regular COLA increase to match other support benefits so we don't have to wait another 35 years. The reporting change to the program was the first recommendation in the DHS report issued this fall called Improving the Health of Minnesotans Living in Deep Poverty, which can be found on our website. We look forward to working with you to make additional improvements to these programs going forward. As we come out of COVID and come to terms with the history of racial disparities in Minnesota, you have the opportunity to be at the center of rewriting the story of Minnesota so that we don't get back to normal, that we get back to better. People often say that they're grateful that you're there to support the most vulnerable in our communities. But I've long said that the secret of the social work world is that you get to see some of Minnesota's strongest and most resilient people face enormous challenges, tackle them, and move on to better lives. We need to hear your frontline stories and the insights they've given you as we work to pull Minnesota out of the historic pandemic year and on to bigger and better things for our future and our children's future. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for who you are for the people of Minnesota.
And thank you, Jodi, for being with us this morning, for taking a few minutes out of your schedule at the last second to be with us. I think that mention of an Mfip increase that is necessary is super important for people to be paying attention to as well. And I love your notion of not getting back to normal, but getting back to better. We absolutely can do every one of these things better. And I think having high expectations in our state, both of ourselves, but of our lawmakers and of the systems that are working for children and families, and trying to make them work better is all of our work. So thanks so much for that. At this time, I want to thank Jodi for being with us this morning, and we are going to switch gears and welcome Representative Athena Hollins up next. So with that, I'm going to take just a second and switch us back to Representative Hollins, who, let's get, Representative Hollins, are you with us? Can you jump on? Awesome.
Yep, I'm here. I can't put my video on because I'm driving currently, and I apologize. The roads were terrible this morning.
No worries.
I'm really happy to be here and to be speaking with all of you.
Great.
And is there anything in particular that you'd like me to talk about, or?
Well, let me give people just a little background on you first, and then we'll talk about that. So let me just say, Representative Hollins is just took office in this past January 21, much like Senator Putnam that we just spoke with. Yet she's already authored over 30 bills, including several that expand the rights and protections in the LGBTQI community and proposals that create higher standards for law enforcement. A daughter of a social worker, Representative Hollins is a lawyer with experience in family law and community inclusion work, and Representative Hollins was also PACE endorsed. So, Representative, those were some of the things that we were hoping you'd talk a little bit about this morning in terms of the GLBTQI community and high standards for law enforcement and whatever else you think. I know you're part of the Posse Caucus, and there's so much moving this session. So what do you think social workers of Minnesota should know? And I should tell you, we're at just about 800 attendees at this part of the morning. So you're talking to 800 social workers. Yeah.
That is fantastic. I am so honored to be here and to be, speaking with you folks today, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about what we've been doing. I think social work is such an important aspect of everything that we do on a day-to-day basis, and I think certainly with a mother who is a social worker, it influences everything that I do and all the ways that I think about how we need to move forward with our lawmaking. And so a couple of things that I think are especially important and that we've tried to focus in on, and that I would love, support from this organization and from your members on, are those LGBTQI plus pieces of legislation, such as, and they're frequent, I won't say they're frequent flyers, but you've seen them before, right? Banning conversion therapy, which we know is incredibly detrimental and harmful to our children, especially our LGBTQI children. Also looking at things that are harmful in maybe not in as direct ways, but just, voting down legislation that is purposefully mean to and anti-trans and transphobic, I think is incredibly important. When we think about how this impacts our trans communities, and especially the bill most recently brought by Representative Lucero, which would criminalize children using the bathroom with the for the gender that they identify as, that is literally just bringing that bill is harmful to the psyche of trans people, and certainly young trans people. And so, you know, I've been trying to do my part to talk to my constituents and talk to individuals about how harmful things like that are for, you know, for our LGBTQ communities. In addition to that, I think, you know, we have brought along with Senator Bigham, have brought this really comprehensive LGBTQI plus bill that kind of addresses everything from the gay trans panic in the criminal defense to access to health care to, again, the ban on conversion therapy, which is incredibly important. And we haven't gotten as far as I would have liked with that comprehensive bill, but we still have next session to be pushing it as well. And so we're really looking towards next session as being a big LGBTQIA plus policy focused session. And, you know, there's some strategy around that. I will say that we are hoping to build some momentum, the momentum that we had prior to the COVID pandemic around these particular issues, because they are really important and they've kind of been put on the back burner because everybody's just trying to survive at this point, right? Try to make it through the day. And so what we really want to do is bring them back into focus and remind folks that even if it's not something that impacts them on a daily basis, it does impact, you know, your neighbors on a daily basis, your friends, your family members are impacted by the legislation that is proposed and the legislation that's passed at the Minnesota State Legislature. And, you know, that has a deep and lasting impact on how those people, and those people being myself included, I fall into the category of LGBTQIA+, and so it has an impact on how we feel about ourselves, how we interact with individuals on a regular basis, how safe we feel in our own communities. And so to me, this is incredibly important work, and we're really looking to build out that momentum and build out support for those particular pieces of legislation. In addition to that, one of the things that I'm really proud of working on is the mental health data and classifying mental health data as private, mental health data that's gathered by law enforcement. And this really stems from, and I think this directly impacts the social work community, it really stems from the idea that we would like more, we want more police departments and law enforcement departments to have people that are mental health care workers, that are social workers, to be working alongside them to deal with situations that don't require use of force, situations where people are merely in a crisis or unable to get the support that they need in a particular situation. And so what this bill does is it classifies their mental health data that's gathered from police departments as classified. Right now it's currently public if it has to do with a police interaction. And so making sure that that information is private makes it easier for police to have those mental health units and work with social workers. And it also makes it easier for, you know, makes it safer for I won't say clients or suspects or whoever they are, for citizens, frankly, for citizens to be able to give that information more freely and not feel scared that it's going to end up in tomorrow's newspaper or that their neighbor is going to be able to look it up online. And so I think it's a really important aspect of trying to move away from a purely punitive law enforcement sort of system and more towards a holistic system where we're looking at all the things that people need and all of the ways that currently police are functioning, which isn't great. We don't need police to be functioning as social workers and as mental health professionals. That's not their job. So we really want to move away from that model and towards something that looks at human beings more holistically. And so I'm really excited about that legislation as well. The final one I will bring up is, and I suspect it's a little controversial, but making it easier for removing some of the barriers for becoming a foster parent. So as most of you probably know, it's actually easier in Minnesota to become an adoptive parent than a foster parent. And there's a lot of barriers in that language that are frankly kind of unnecessary. Like if you've ever committed or, a felony ever, that you cannot then foster a child later. And this disproportionately impacts BIPOC communities because, they're over policed and have, statistically more frequent interactions with police, and therefore are more likely to have this sort of history with law enforcement that prohibits them from becoming foster parents later in life. And certainly we really want to strike a balance between being incredibly safe with our children and making sure they're secure, but we also know that keeping kids, close to home within family units is really important. And what we're hoping with this legislation is that it will make it easier for family members to become foster parents when, a biological parent is no longer able to take care of the child. So really we're looking at like aunties and uncles and grandparents who might have a history of, may have had, some things that they've done in their youth that are preventing them currently from becoming foster parents, and just removing those requirements so that they can keep the child within the community, keep the child close to those family members and close to the family unit. And we know that kids that do stay within the family unit and do stay within their communities have better outcomes overall than kids that are ripped away from their families. So I'm really proud of that legislation. It's been a long time coming. I picked it up. Chair Rena Moran was actually the person who carried it previously, and there have been a number of negotiations that have gone into this with both the GOP side, but also with a lot of different stakeholders, including members of the judiciary and members of various organizations and DHS, to really come to some legislation that provides safety and security for our children, which is paramount of importance, but also recognizing that some of the restrictions that we have currently just don't make a whole lot of sense, and frankly, end up being, I don't think purposefully, but unintentionally biased against BIPOC communities. So I'll stop there. I don't know if we're taking questions or anything like that.
We don't have time for questions, Athena, and I do realize that you have a floor session that started 3 minutes ago also, so I'm sure you're trying to get in there. So I just want to say I really appreciate you being with us. I think sharing some of that bigger picture insight in what you're trying to accomplish and not framing it all in bill numbers and that sort of thing, I think is really helpful for all of our brains. I think that, the work is not, especially at this time of this session, is not always about the bills. Sometimes it's about the omnibus bill and what ends up in there. Yeah. And so a lot of the work that gets done by the end really is framed by whatever is most important to our legislators and how you finagle getting it done somehow. So I know some people in the chat are like, what bill is that she's talking about? What bill are we talking about? And so do you have any quick resources that you could point people to, maybe your website or others that link to the particular things that you're working on right now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, I'm not one of those people that memorizes the bill numbers, unfortunately.
I appreciate that. No worries.
But I know that if you, I can certainly follow up with you and provide you with the bill numbers of all of these. I'm happy to do that.
No worries.
Also, if you go to my my official representative page, which I don't know, but if you go there and you look at chief bills authored, you will see a whole list of bills that are authored, and you can access it there. But I can certainly follow up with you and just send information.
that's what I figured, that they might be living there. So people can definitely look at your page for those. And our legislative consultant, Jenny Arneson's been tracking most of these things also and can share some insights with our attendees as well. So Representative Hollins, thank you for being with us this morning. We really appreciate you spending some time with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
For the rest of the session too.
Thank you so much. It has been an honor.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thank you. You too.
Well, next up in our schedule, folks, and I know we are moving from one thing to the next really quick, but next up this morning will be Nan Madden, and we are going to, excuse me while I skip through some of these things, some of which we will come back to, I promise. But this is exactly why I did not give you all a minute-by-minute schedule for the day, because this is exactly what happens every year. So with that, I want to introduce to you all Nan Madden. Taxes and spending are often very intimidating topics, and yet it's really important that we understand the basics of them when advocating in a budget year like this one. So fortunately for us, the Minnesota Budget Project and its director, Nan Madden, specialize in helping advocates for a fair and just Minnesota develop the language they need to advocate effectively. So Nan is here this morning to share some expertise with us. And Nan's been here on and off over the years, and it's great to have you back with us again. So I'll turn it over to you, Nan.
Great, thank you. Thanks. It's good to be back, if only virtually. It's always a great event. For folks who are not familiar with the Minnesota Budget Project, we are a research and advocacy initiative of the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. We identify and advance policy solutions to make Minnesota a state where everyone can thrive, regardless of who they are or where they live. And we work primarily in the areas of tax, budget, and economic policy. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about some of the key tax and budget issues this session, and especially how you can add your voice to that discussion. And that's so important because policymakers are going to be making budget decisions this legislative session, including setting the state's next two-year budget, which will start on July 1st this year. We've been talking with policymakers and the public around what we think the priorities should be this session around those budget decisions, and they include taking bold action to respond to the pandemic and economic downturn so that all Minnesotans can be healthy, safe, and economically secure. And it means building a stronger and more equitable recovery. We need to be addressing areas of disparities and disinvestment that existed before the pandemic and that keep us from becoming a state where everyone can thrive. So that means looking at things like underinvestment in affordable housing, in mental health, in childcare, schools, and so much more. We just think it is so urgent that we are making structural changes to dismantle Minnesota's worst in the nation racial disparities. Now, we've seen the state's budget situation dramatically change over the past year, along with the ups and downs of the national economy in the course of the pandemic. In February, the state's budget forecast showed things improving, although the pandemic and economic disruption are continuing. State revenues are doing better, but general revenues are still down compared to what was expected in the last February forecast before the pandemic hit. For the upcoming 22-23 budget cycle, the state is expecting a modest surplus, but it is mostly temporary. And for 24-25, what's sometimes called the out years or the tails, on paper, the state expects a surplus as well. But when we take into account what it costs just to keep existing services up for the cost of inflation, that turns into a deficit. And we know that these budget calculations measure against a baseline that doesn't include all of what's needed for all of us to thrive. It's also important to keep in mind that improving state budget figures doesn't mean that everyone is back to normal or doing well. The COVID-related recession is perhaps the most unequal in modern history. It has hit hardest those with the least resources to get by, including low-income Minnesotans and Minnesotans of color. Hardship still is high. There's too many folks out of work, struggling to put food on the table or behind on their rent. At the same time, many of those with greater resources of income and wealth have seen their assets grow, along with a rising stock market. The impact on businesses has also been very uneven, with some industries hit hard, while other industries and some of the largest corporations doing quite well. So those are exacerbating longstanding trends of growing income inequality and concentration of wealth. Now, recently, the federal government passed legislation that will be sending additional new revenues to the state and local governments. Some of that's dedicated for specific purposes like schools or healthcare and childcare, and some of it is more flexible. That's really important and it's going to make a difference, but we also need to keep in mind those federal dollars are temporary. And deciding how we use those federal dollars is another set of important decisions before our policymakers. We need to use those short-term dollars wisely to respond to the pandemic and to make those structural changes needed to address areas of disparities and disinvestment. And then we need new state dollars to sustain those investments after the one-time influx of federal dollars is gone. Now, I've worked on revenue issues for more than 20 years, and I have seen what can happen when lots of voices make a compelling case for the kinds of public investments and the future we want for our state. So that's really something we all need to be doing. Policymakers need to be hearing from us all about the investments our communities need and why it makes sense to ask those of us with the most resources to contribute a bit more to build that future. That's what we are coming together to do in the Together We Rise Minnesota campaign. And if I can have my next slide come up, that campaign, and actually, why don't we go one more? Thank you. The campaign is united by the following principles: that Minnesota is a state of abundance, and we should raise revenues in order to fully respond to the pandemic and the economic downturn so that Minnesotans can be healthy, safe, and economically secure, to protect community and public services that Minnesotans count on, and build a more equitable recovery. And secondly, that policymakers should prioritize revenue-raising options that focus on those with the most resources and make the tax system more fair and equitable. If we jump to the next slide, I really invite you all to join with us. Visit our website, the Together We Rise. Sorry, we got a little font problem there, but the website is togetherwerisem.org. Some of the things you can do there, we ask organizations to show your support by joining the more than 100 organizations that have already signed on to our campaign principles. As individuals, you can add your voice. If you go to the Get Involved part of our website, there's an action alert you can take today. You can use that to communicate with your legislators and show your support for a bold response and a more equitable future. And if you join our email list, you'll get information about future ways to get involved. Something that those in this audience might be particularly interested in is we also on the website have a story bank to collect your stories and the stories of people you work with about the investments needed in our communities. And then you'll also find analysis, messaging materials, social media, other ways to support your engagement on these issues. It is so important that we engage in the budget debate. We are at the point in the legislative session when policymakers have put out their tax and budget plans. And some of the budget plans on the table reflect the priorities and principles I've talked about, and some are really falling short. So when we take a look at Governor Walz, the Minnesota House, and the Minnesota Senate, and their plans for the state's budget, Governor Walz would raise about $670 million in new revenues. And that really follow the principles we've laid out, including a new fifth income tax bracket on the very wealthiest Minnesotans to bring in new resources for the kinds of investments needed. The governor's tax plan also would enact policies to make the tax system more equitable to lower income Minnesotans and Minnesotans of color. Because he has those revenue increases, those help fund $1.6 billion in new investments in his budget proposal for things like education, economic supports for struggling families, higher education, and a lot more. The House takes a similar approach. Their overall budget on the spending side goes a little larger even than the governor's, making $1.9 billion in new investments. And their tax plan also raises revenues on the highest income Minnesotans, as well as corporations with overseas profits. They use those increased revenues to fund some tax cuts, some tax reductions for workers and families, and some temporary tax cuts related to the pandemic. But in the future budget cycle in 24-25, their tax plan raises $450 million in new revenues to make those kinds of structural changes I've been talking about. The Senate, however, goes in a different direction. Rather than raise revenues, They plan to enact $591 million in tax cuts. We don't have the details yet. They haven't released their tax bills, so we don't know how much of those tax cuts are temporary and how much might be permanent or permanent erosion of revenues. And because they aren't raising revenues, their budget plan has the smallest amount of new investments, $623 million. That's about a third of what the House proposes in new investments and $1 billion less than the governor. So that really means the Senate is relying on those federal dollars rather than state resources to fund our pandemic response and recovery. And they don't have a plan to make us better off in terms of sustainable revenues after those temporary federal dollars are gone. So those are really different approaches to the challenges our state faces and really have some real consequences for how many resources are available to make the kind of investments needed in our communities. So I will wrap up there. I invite you again to visit the Together We Rise website to get engaged on this policy debate. And you can also visit our Minnesota Budget Project website to keep up with our analysis on state budget negotiations as they evolve. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nan. I really, we really appreciate you bringing your expertise here. This is, as Karen mentioned, is a really complicated topic, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be a complicated topic. And I do want to note that NASW has the same, we do have this in our legislative agenda and priorities, a similar stance as the Minnesota Budget Project. We support creating a budget and maintaining sufficient revenue to support a just and fair Minnesota society. And certainly you mentioned that that's in line with the governor's proposal and even the House's proposal, but not the Senate's proposal. And we're talking about the chambers, but are we even more specific to say that this is very much a partisan issue? And we talked about that at the very beginning, about one of the challenges of reaching a budget this year is that there are budget issues, but there are really philosophical differences. And if you listen to the Republican, and you might have something to add here, if you listen to the Republican discussion about it, they really philosophically do not believe in taxes and supporting kind of government structure. So it's a very different approach.
I think that's right. The debate often is about do we assume that the amount of dollars that we have is enough and it's just about how we divide them up? Or do we imagine, because of what the outcomes are and what folks are telling us, that we actually need to bring more resources into the system, and where should they go?
And that's exactly what you can talk to your legislator about. You do not need to be a fiscal expert to do this. Really, it's about using the words to say, we believe in supporting our society, and we want you to find the revenue to do that, even if that means raising taxes. We are not opposed to that conversation as a constituent, and particularly if you have Republican representation. So thank you again, Nan, for being here. And slides will be provided to you later too, so don't worry if you've missed it. So related to that, we're going to introduce our next speaker. Zack Eichten is here from the Minnesota Coalition of the Homeless. So thank you for being here. And this is related to budget, but a little bit more specific. I know a lot of our social workers, Zack, we have like almost about 800 people watching here, and I know housing advocacy is really important to so many of our social workers, and so they're excited to hear a little bit more about these resources. And Nan mentioned some incoming federal resources, and there's a lot of discussion about how we can support housing with those resources. So Zack's here to share a little bit more insight on that. So take it away, Zack.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jenny. And hi, folks. My name is Zack Eichten. I'm the Director of Public Policy for the Minnesota Coalition for the Homeless. It's wonderful to be here. I'm also one of the policy co-chairs for the Homes for All Coalition. The Homes for All Coalition is a coalition of more than 270 organizations across the state, and we work on advocacy issues for housing from across the entire continuum of housing, from unsheltered homelessness all the way to home ownership. And our agenda reflects that. So we have a really comprehensive agenda that focuses on targeted resources to ending homelessness, as well as getting folks into that goal of affordable home ownership as well. Just up at the start here, something that we need to mention in housing in particular in Minnesota is that we have some of the worst racial disparities in the country when it comes to housing. And we need to, as we're looking at the impact of the issues that we advocate for at those racial disparities, to make sure that we're targeting resources appropriately. And we try to reflect that in our agenda as we go forward here. But we actually are in a really good position for our agenda for Homes for All this year. And I just want to talk a little bit about where we're at in both the House and the Senate as we move forward. We're just past their deadline, so most of the committees have released their omnibus bills and have voted on them already. So at this point, we are just working towards getting to conference committee at this point, and we're really reflected well in both the House and the Senate in some cases. So I work typically more in the HHS committee, so those will probably be a little bit more comprehensive as I go through where we're at. But I'm here to talk about where the Homes for All Coalition has priorities. And over in the Senate, we have something in that human services bill that we're really excited about. Some of you may work with folks who are in the housing supports program. And housing supports is the state's best way to get people into stable housing long term. And what we're doing is, for community-based settings, is proposing a $100 a month base rate increase. Right now in Minnesota, that base rate for housing supports to keep people in that permanent and stable housing is capped at $934 a month. And we're advocating for an increase of $100 to that. Our median rent in Minnesota is $977 a month. And this base rate covers both rent and utilities. So we're not even meeting the rent needs, let alone the utility needs for a lot of Minnesotans in this program. This is a really critical way that we can make sure that our providers can continue to stay enrolled in this program, and that we keep folks in that stable housing as we move forward. Additionally, and this is the piece I'm like extra excited about, is we have an absence waiver policy for people who are seeking medical treatment in the housing supports program. Right now, you can only be absent from housing supports for 18 days at a time and up to 60 days in a calendar year. We want to create a waiver for that policy so that folks who need medical treatment, either behavioral health treatment, rehabilitation treatment, anything, would be able to extend that up to 92 days with a potential waiver from the Commissioner of Human Services to extend that if needed. We know that if housing is healthcare, and that when we force people to choose between housing and healthcare, it results in a bad situation, either losing housing or not being able to get needed treatment. So we're really excited about that piece being in the Human Services Bill in the Senate. For the House, for the Human Services Bill, we have some other really great things. The Emergency Services Program, which is the state's most useful tool in responding to homelessness. It is the pot of money that funds operations for shelters, but it also funds a lot of great other things. It can fund mental health treatment, chemical dependency treatment. It can fund childcare, transportation, employment counseling, all these really great things. But statewide, currently, the base budget is only $844,000 a year out of a state budget of $50 billion. And we want it to obviously increase that base budget. So the House proposal for that is to increase that to $9 million a year, or $18 million over the biennium. We're very much supportive of that. Additionally, the House is proposing shelter capital dollars that would add $5 million a biennium until 2026 to increase and maintain the supply of our shelters across the state. Right now, 80 of 87 counties in Minnesota don't have enough beds to meet the shelter needs in their communities. So we're really pleased with where the House is coming through on shelter capital. There's a lot more in housing as well that we're really excited about. One that you might know about is the Bridges housing voucher. What Bridges does is it connects people with serious mental illness to a housing voucher until they can, so they can bridge the gap until they can get a Section 8 voucher. and the House is proposing a $1.5 million base increase to that program. Essentially what that means is more people with mental health needs are going to get access to housing, and we're really excited about that. There's a lot of tenant rights and tenant protection stuff that are in the housing omnibus bill for the House that we're really excited about. Number one is a pre-eviction notice of 14 days. Essentially what that means is if a landlord is intending to file an eviction against a tenant, they have to let them know 14 days in advance so that the tenant has an opportunity to remedy the situation before an eviction goes on their record. An eviction can be a really traumatic experience, and it follows people right now pretty much forever. It's really difficult to get those evictions off your record, and it makes it really tough to get access to good housing after you get that eviction. So we want to prevent evictions as much as possible. Which brings us to the next part is if an eviction does happen, how do we work through that? And so we have some eviction expungement reforms that are in the House bill as well that we're excited about. Essentially what that would do is when folks have an eviction, it wouldn't be public knowledge until there's an actual ruling by a judge. Right now, somebody can just file an eviction whenever, and that stays on your record, and people can see that if you go to apply for other housing. So you want to make sure that there's an actual judgment before those are public, as well as being able to expunge that eviction after a certain number of years. We also want to make sure that we are being really cognizant of this individual situations that people may find themselves in. So we have a provision in here that would be able to break a lease in case of infirmity. So essentially, say somebody were to get a traumatic brain injury or a stroke, and they needed to move to either a nursing care facility, or maybe if they have a townhouse, they need to move to one level living, something like that. You would be able to give notice and leave your lease early, so you're not paying for 2 leases or stuck in a lease that does not work for what situation you have found yourself in. So we're really excited about that as well. On top of all of this, there is of course the looming eviction moratorium and the off-ramp and emergency rental assistance issues that we're tracking. I would say that if you know somebody who's behind on rent or utilities, renthelpmn.org is going to be the emergency rental assistance that's going from federal dollars through the state. It's the one-stop shop to go there. We're still tracking how that's getting rolled out. We're still waiting on the official, it's up and running right now, but that is where the nearly $670 million of federal dollars are going to be rolled out through. And that's going to help people all the way back from if they have unpaid rent from March 13th of 2020. So it goes back, it goes forward, and it's really going to help stabilize a lot of people. We also know that the eviction moratorium is still in effect right now. And as the pandemic ramps down here, hopefully soon, eventually that eviction moratorium is going to go away. So what we are doing as housing advocates is making sure that we are advocating for a very well thought out off ramp instead of, just like snap of the finger and suddenly evictions are open. We want to make sure that those protections are staying in place and rolled out sort of one at a time to open up evictions again. We know that for landlords, there's a lot of issues right now around people not paying rent. I would say just hold out hope a little bit longer. The Rent Help MN is going to be up and running very soon, and that really is going to get that back rent and hopefully alleviate some of those issues that we see. We absolutely need to support our tenants. We need to support our landlords. Housing stability is absolutely critical. So we really need to support both sides there. We can't afford an eviction wave. We just don't have the capacity in our shelters. So keeping people in stable housing is the goal. that is really where the state of play is for housing issues at the state level. There is this outstanding $2.6 billion of federal money that's coming in, and we're really excited to see where that goes. And that's going to be really exciting to see how much of that we can get for housing and homelessness issues this session.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Zach. You covered a lot of ground.
Yes.
As has each of our presenters this morning. And so I just want to say to all of our attendees, if your minds are a little boggled, don't worry. That's exactly what I said up front. Like, listen for where your passion is, take what you can, and know that we will come back to some of this. Zach, hang on just 1 second. I want to say a couple things. One is, we are members of the Homes for All Coalition. NASW Minnesota is. We have a couple of our SPAN members who attend those meetings whenever they're able to. We've had a couple people in the chat ask who else are members of the Homes for All Coalition, and it would be helpful if you would share some of that material with us, and we would share it with our attendees as well. Some of them are very interested in your work. You mentioned the HHH committee, and I just wanted to say that's the Health and Human Services Committee. There are lots of people in the room, so we have about 800 folks on right at the moment, and not everyone knows all the lingo. So I think it's helpful to keep us all in the loop on that. I also just want to say I really appreciate you pointing to very thoughtful intricacies of policies that need to be changed and waivers and things like that. That's the stuff that for many of us in our direct practice work affects our
Don't worry, sometimes Karen's internet freezes. She'll be back in a moment.
day-to-day ability for shoot, I didn't even know I was frozen. Am I back yet?
I think you're back now.
Oh, good. Thank you so much, Zach. I appreciate that. So what I was saying, I don't know what you heard, but really thoughtful intricacies and waivers and policies that affect our practice with clients. And so I think telling those stories of what's needed for our clients to our legislators helps so much. I also love your connection between housing and healthcare. That is core. That is like, we know that in our practice as social workers, but I love you pointing that out again for us. So thank you so much for being with us this morning, Zach. We really appreciate you spending some time with us.
Yeah, happy to be here. Reach out with any questions.
Absolutely. All right, so next up, I love Nancy's ready. Nancy's up next. So next up, we're going to have Nancy Fitzsimmons for just a moment sharing about a disability policy issue. And right after Nancy, we'll have Kenza from TakeAction Minnesota. I know Kenza's with us, but if Kenza, when you get a second, if you want to flip your camera on, you will be up next. All right, Nancy, I'll give you a moment here to share this disability policy issue.
Great. Well, hello again, social workers. And I'm Nancy Fitzsimmons, she, her. I'm a white woman with chin-length red hair. I wear glasses. I have an RBG pin and a Black Lives Matter pin on the lapel of my tan colored jacket. Why did I do that? Because for people with a visual disability, this gives them some understanding of who I am, because they perhaps cannot see me. So I have about a minute to talk to you about policy issues connected to the disability communities in Minnesota. So the theme of the Minnesota Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities 2021 legislative agenda, in which the ARC Minnesota is a member and I serve on the board, is Better Together, Access, Equity, Inclusion, Choice. If you go to the MCD and the ARC websites, you will find information about their entire legislative agendas. Next slide, Karen. So I have time to highlight one issue today, and that issue is expanding access to inclusive childcare for children with disabilities and medical complexities. There is some bipartisan support. The chief author in the House is a Democrat, and the chief author in the Senate is a Republican. The bill would invest in grants for inclusive childcare to help keep children's parents in the workforce and ensure that children with disabilities and medical complexities receive support alongside their siblings and peers. Funding for these grants is in the governor's budget and in the House's early child omnibus bill. Now we need to get the Senate on board and keep the governor and House in support of this bill. Please encourage our elected officials to support House File 668 and Senate File 1735. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, everybody.
Nicely done. 1 minute, Nancy. Fantastic. Folks, I hope you're hearing that our SPAN committee has worked really hard to craft this day to include so much content on all of these different issues, and you're hearing different pieces from different folks. And so next up, I am thrilled to welcome Kenza Hadj-Moussa from Director of Public Affairs and Communications from TakeAction Minnesota. Now, TakeAction is a statewide multiracial organization fighting for racial, gender, economic, and climate justice and a democracy that works for all of us. We are proud members of TakeAction and partners of TakeAction and love following their work as well. Kenza will update us about their work on Earned Sick and Safe Time, which has passed the House and will help us understand next steps for advocacy. So thanks so much for being with us this morning, Kenza. We have just over 800 social workers from Minnesota with us at this moment in today's session.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you everyone for being here. Good morning. My name is Kenza. I use she and her pronouns, and just so thrilled to be here today. I've been to many NASW Days on the Hill and events over the years, and just want to affirm that your voices are so incredibly important at the Capitol. And we've done a lot of advocacy online over the last year, and know that those online meetings with legislators are also incredibly helpful and make a difference. TakeAction has a wide range of issues that we're supporting at the Capitol this year around care, climate justice, COVID relief. We're also very involved locally in campaigns to reimagine community safety, which is on everybody's mind right now. I wanted to speak for a few minutes about Earned Sick and Safe Time. This is an issue that TakeAction has worked on for about 14 years. It's an issue that time has come, especially as we continue to live through this heart-wrenching pandemic. So for those of you who don't know, Earned Sick and Safe Time is a basic employment standard that allows workers to accrue up to 48 hours of earned sick and safe time that they can use throughout the year. 3 cities, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Duluth, have already passed local ordinances. About 11 states have ESST laws in place. Cities around the country have already passed this ordinance. It's a tool that we know works for people, and that really everybody needs the tools to take care of themselves and their families in a really basic way. During COVID, this is truer than ever, and we really know that our health and well-being is tied together. So it's so exciting that there's so many of you who are on the call today from all around the state, because it really is communities outside of the Twin Cities and Duluth that voices are especially important as we push a statewide law over the finish line. Today, about 975,000 Minnesotans don't have access to Earned Sick and Safe Time. Most of them work in fields that are dominated by women and people of color. So that's retail, hospitality, care work, temp work, part-time jobs, and so many jobs that we've come to call essential. And we've heard dozens and dozens of stories over the years in our efforts to pass Earned Sick and Safe Time. During this pandemic, we're hearing stories about workers in food courts who are showing up to work with a sick colleague next to them, and what it feels like to not have the dignity of being able to take a day off for their coworkers, getting penalized by employers for not showing up to work when there's really bad weather or they're sick. We hear stories from school nurses about students whose parents aren't able to pick them up when they're sick at school, and so many stories about older siblings who've missed so much school to take care of younger siblings because their parents didn't have access to Earned Sick and Safe Time. So there's so many examples of people who ESST impacts. The safe time portion covers both inclement weather, when there's school closure days and parents can't get childcare at the last minute. ESST would cover that. And safe time also provides paid time off for victims who are dealing with domestic violence, stalking, sexual assault, variety of reasons. So it's really, really important not only for making sure that families and workers can make ends meet if they're sick or they need to go get a COVID test or take an hour off to go get the vaccine, but it also protects workers from being fired for being out sick or needing to take care of a sick loved one. It's still legal in Minnesota right now, unless you live in those cities, that you can get fired and lose your job just for being sick. The status of this at the legislature is it has passed out of the House Labor and Industry Committee. The Deputy Speaker, Liz Olson, has carried the bill. She's been a terrific champion. It has not had a hearing in the Senate, but what our strategy and hope for is that in the end of session negotiations, where so much is going to be on the table and worked out and worked through, that there's enough momentum that with the governor's support and with really strong support in the House that it can get pushed through in some of those conference committee negotiations, especially since it's already up and running successfully in 3 cities. So talking to both your House members and senators can make a difference, in asking them to really push on their leaders to make sure that earned sick and safe time is finally included in end of session negotiations is really helpful. And I also just want to make a reminder, as so many of our hearts are focused on Dante Wright and what we can be doing about community safety. There's more bills that are being pushed and lifted up in the House and in the Senate around police accountability. And to also just remind you that your voices are really important at the local level. We have such a, it's really quite simple to influence our local democracy. And there's caucuses that are coming up. These are nonpartisan, but everybody has the right to go and speak locally about issues that matter. So thank you all so much for being here, and we'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Thanks so much, Kenza, for being with us this morning, for taking some time to talk about earned sick and safe time. It is something that affects all of us and the people we serve. And as you said, it's been worked on for a really long time. We've been talking about this one at Days at the Capitol for years. And so I'm thrilled to see some movement happening. And sometimes, as we all learn about in our policy classes, there are these things called policy windows, and they open up. And when they open up, we have to be ready. And so you guys were ready. You've been working on this for a long time. So thank you for being at the forefront of this work. Kenza, we really appreciate you being with us today. Next up, folks, we are going to switch gears a little bit, and we are going to welcome Melissa Hensley from Augsburg University. And right after Melissa, we will have Malaika from the Minnesota Legal Project, who will be talking about some of the things Kenza was closing with around reimagining community safety. And we will take a little stretch break right after Malaika's done as well. So Melissa, take it away.
Thank you, Karen. I'm going to do this very quickly. But I did want to make sure that we were thinking today not only about how we ourselves are going to be engaged in advocacy, but how we can help clients to be involved in civic engagement and in policy advocacy. I love what Senator Putnam said about citizen as a verb, and that applies not only to us, but it also applies to people that we serve. So sometimes there's this feeling like advocacy is too complicated, it's too stressful, people we serve are not going to be interested in this kind of thing. And actually, that's not necessarily true. I know from my own work that a lot of folks that we serve are very interested in policy and are very interested in the impact that policy has on the services that they are utilizing. We also have some mental health research that shows that civic engagement is actually promotes wellness. It can promote better physical as well as mental health. And so it's very important for people to be involved. So how do we do that? One thing is that when we're assessing the social environment of people that we serve, we can actually ask people, are you registered to vote? Would you like to register to vote, and provide information about how to go about doing that? Also, in that assessment of the social environment, find out, do clients know who their elected representatives are? And if they don't, to facilitate that process of of learning that information. Also, providing information about policy impact on services. We don't want to tell people who to vote for, but we can provide information about how public policy has an effect on services that people are receiving. And then also, it can be so important for people to share their own personal stories about how services may have impacted them. So encouraging people to contact their lawmakers and to really share those stories and narratives. That can have such a powerful impact, so that it's not just social workers speaking out and saying, we want this for the people that we serve, but also really, really lifting up the voices of people that we serve so that legislators can hear from them and understand, you know, the critical impact that health and human services have on so many Minnesotans. So that's it.
That's it. And that's so helpful, Melissa. Thanks so much for sharing those insights with us. I think that as we move through our day and think about each of these issues, it is so important for us to think about, okay, how do we leverage what we know and how we know how to connect with this process, and also get our clients to do that as well, and those that we work with, our colleagues, everyone. Like, the more that we can grow that community of people advocating and telling their stories, the more we are heard collectively. That said, as we move into our next speaker this morning, I want to, in just a second here, introduce Malaika. So Malaika, join us on the screen here. That would be lovely. You know, this topic, when we're thinking about reimagining community safety as a state, as people, we all come at this conversation with all sorts of different thoughts and opinions and experiences and lives. And so this is one of those moments where, and why we purposefully put that conversation about, remember to talk to your clients about how all of these policy issues are affecting them, so they can advocate with their policymakers as well. So I think for this conversation in particular, I think that's really timely. So Malaika, thank you for being with us this morning. Malaika is a macro practice social worker advocating for youth justice reform transformation in Minnesota with the Legal Rights Center, and is also a community faculty member at the University of Minnesota MSW program. The Legal Rights Center seeks justice and promotes racial equity through a variety of strategies, including community education, restorative practices, and public policy advocacy. So thank you so much for joining us today for this important topic, Malaika, and I will leave it to you and switch into your slides. And I can't hear you yet, Malaika. Let's see if we can check your sound here. Let's see, it says you're unmuted, but I still can't hear you. Everyone, just take 1 second for a breath, which is not a bad idea. I think we hear you now.
Here I am.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thanks for having me here today and for that introduction to the Legal Rights Center. As Karen said, we are a community-driven law firm serving youth and adults in Hennepin County. And our mission, as she mentioned, is to work with our communities to seek and promote justice and racial equity. On the next slide, I work at the Legal Rights Center. I'm a social worker on our team, and I also help to organize the Minnesota Coalition for Youth Justice. So we are a collective of community members, organizations, and impacted citizens who really believe that we need transformational change in our youth justice system, though we work at the Legal Rights Center also in the adult system as well. Our Coalition for Youth Justice really has these principles that outline a vision for a justice system and a legal system that we'd like to see happen for everyone who comes in contact with it. You know, a legal system that is led with equity and love, that's rooted in humanity, and ultimately that's responsive to the strengths and needs of youth and families and communities, rather than leading first with a punitive edge. Our coalition explicitly centers on reducing racial and ethnic disparities and uplifting policies and practices that treat youth and families with dignity, informed by anti-racist and culturally sound practices. On the next slide, you know, as a social worker who's working in the legal system, I know that y'all have had time this morning and heard like kind of pitches from so many different people on issue areas that are important to them. And here's my quick pitch around why I believe that all of us as social workers have an ethical obligation to be involved in legal system transformation. If we pull from our ethical principles in our code of ethics, we know, we've memorized that social justice is one of our core principles as social workers, and that we work every day to challenge social injustice. And as we just saw on Sunday with the police killing of Daunte Wright, as we're watching the defense portray Mr. Floyd in the Chauvin trial, it's hard for me to imagine how we could not see the way that our current legal system is operating as not as what it isn't just. And our other ethical principle about the dignity and worth of the person, in many ways, the way that our legal system currently functions is in direct opposition to that. We say that once you are even accused of a crime, you don't have dignity, you don't have worth. Instead, we cast you aside as a lesser than member of our community. And that's in violation of our principles. And I think that's why we have an obligation as a social worker to act. On this slide, there's a lot of bills here, and there's so many more that I could have named about work happening at the legislature this year. Folks from TakeAction, Kenza mentioned a few things happening today, and I'll run through those pretty quickly. But legal system transformation really focuses on everything from the beginning of someone's interaction with the legal system at the point of contact with law enforcement, all the way through the end to the collateral consequences, the consequences that come after you've been involved in the legal system. Under law enforcement, as Kenza mentioned just today at 1 o'clock in the House Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law Committee, there will be a hearing on a number of law enforcement related bills and provisions. Things focused on increasing civilian oversight, also ending police-only responses to mental health crisis calls. This is something that Representative Hollins was talking about earlier today, but this bill would say that mental health practitioners need to be called in when law enforcement is responding to a mental health call. There is provisions on the table this session around ending qualified immunity, which would make law enforcement eligible for civil or criminal liability and culpability if necessary. And also, as a direct response to the killing of Daunte Wright just on Sunday, a bill focused on limiting stops and detention for certain motor vehicle violations so that law enforcement cannot stop people, bring them in, arrest them for things as simple as having a broken taillight or having outstanding warrants in some respects. Just kind of moving across this process, I'm not going to talk about all of these things, but there's a lot of work happening at the point of detention. Our Coalition for Youth Justice is advocating for an objective risk assessment instrument to ensure that there isn't bias coming into play when young people are brought into detention facilities. There are bills focused on court processes, on raising the lower age of juvenile court. Right now in Minnesota, you can be as young as 10 and charged and processed in juvenile court. This bill would raise that age up to 13 and treat those younger and support younger members of our community through other systems like mental health or child welfare. There are bills related to sentencing all across the spectrum, from eliminating life without release sentencing for juvenile offenses to, creating opportunities for women who are incarcerated to be in community when they're pregnant or when they're new mothers. And then a few folks have mentioned this, both in terms of like child care and foster care, but also in terms of housing. The collateral consequences of being involved in the legal system are extreme limits and barriers for members of our community to continue to live and function as full members of our community after they've had their interactions with the court system. So things like amending Department of Human Services disqualifications to ensure that even to ensure that the amount of time that you might be disqualified from working or serving in a human service related field is reduced, as well as creating an automatic expungement process for certain offenses so that folks don't have those records hanging over them for extreme amounts of time. And I just have one more slide here to say all of those things are happening at the legislature this year. All of the bills that I mentioned are included in different House omnibus provisions, and some things are also included in Senate omnibus bills. So we're hoping that when it comes time for our House and Senate leaders to come to conference committee, that none of those things get left on the table, that those bills get passed, and that we can see some important shifts in our legal system in this year. But we also know, again, in our pitch as social workers, the importance of human relationships. And legal system transformation is not going to just happen because of policy change at the legislature. It's going to happen also because of conversations we have in community with our neighbors, with our family members, with our clients, and with our local officials as well. So at the local level, again, kind of a thing that Kenza mentioned, there is so much power in the legal system that happens at the county level, be it in police contracts and the power of the prosecutor and the judges that we choose to elect. And so these are all things that even outside of the legislature, we can all be involved with in our local communities, as well as, us as individual social workers and us as a community of practice, wrestling with the idea of what safety means to each of us and what our role is as social workers in that. As I mentioned before, there are numerous bills at the legislature that are calling and constantly asking for social workers to come in and be involved in community safety and public safety. And I think that we have a lot of reckoning to do as a profession on what that will look like, how we make sure that as social workers, we're not upholding the same kind of carceral mindset, the same tenets of white supremacy that have led us to this legal system now that dehumanizes communities of color in the way that it does, and ultimately creates a less safe community for each of us. So thanks so much for having me today. It's really great to chat with you all. My contact information's here. I would love also to talk to anybody who's thinking about working in macro practice as a social worker. It's a great community to be a part of.
Thank you so much, Malaika. It is so fantastic to have other social workers in our midst. And as our audience can probably tell, we try whenever possible to find the social workers who are the voices for all of these issues whenever possible. And we love when we have social workers embedded in all of these places doing the work. Macro policy social work is core to my heart also, and many of those in your audience today. So thanks for sharing that insight. And I think weaving the issues into our code of ethics and our values, and I mean, these things are not disconnected from one another, right? So I appreciate you putting those pieces together. And I love when I don't have to say everything. We just bring the social workers to the table and they say all the things that need to be said. I love that. So thanks again, Malaika, for being with us this morning. All right, folks, it has been a busy day already. And so before we transition into our next piece, I want us to take a moment for a break, and a stretch break and a brain break. So if you need a break, like you literally need to walk away for a moment and take care of your business or whatever, I'm giving you a moment in between some heady content and important speakers to do that. Now, before I do my break slide, because if I put that up, you're going to start reading it and you're going to be distracted. I want all of my panelists to turn their cameras on and join me. It is 11:28. We've been sitting here for 2.5 hours, social workers, and I'm not cool with that. And we skipped our coconut earlier because all of our presenters were ready to roll and we needed to let our policymakers get to their floor sessions. So I'm coming back to this. So in my mind, folks, self-care for social workers is so important. So for those of you in our audience, I encourage you to join us as you are able in this little stretch break. So we're going to do what we call a coconut. And we do this at my office a lot, and I have shared this in all sorts of trainings and when I teach and all sorts of things. But we need breaks, folks, in our day for our brains to continue to work. We've already covered way too much ground this morning for our brains to really hold all of it. And thank goodness we record it so we can all go back if we need to. But we're going to do a coconut this morning, which basically means our bodies are going to make the word coconut. Okay, I love Nancy's like doing what I'm doing. That's what I need to do, folks. Do what I'm doing. Okay, so the first first C, we're going to spell coconut with our bodies. Our first C is going to be off to one side. And you can do this standing or sitting or however feels comfortable for you in whatever way works with your body. So you're going to make a C. And then you're going to make your first O by putting your hands up at the top. Let me just show you where my hands are here. Sometimes I like to stretch my back, so I open that chest a little bit. Maybe hollow it out also. Give your back a little stretch. Now I want you to do a C to the other side. Remember, or did you notice how I didn't say left or right? Because then we're all confused. It does not matter, folks. Just do a C on either side. Do your other side, whichever one you didn't do.
Hey, Karen, can you go to the slide with the coconut?
I'm not going to, Shreen, just because it's a picture of a coconut and it's way back there.
Okay.
And
Let's try to get a screenshot.
That's okay. Oh, you are? Sorry, she wants a screenshot. Okay, so during the next O, you have to, when Shreen tells you you need to do it, I guess I should just do it, right, folks? So you're doing your O out in front of you with your hands clasped. You're making an O. I'm still trying to find the coconut. Hang on, we're almost there. There we are. All right. Everybody smile who's on the screen. We're coconutting. All right, our N is going to be bending down and touching our toes. So not a great photo op for this one, but do what you can to get as close as you can to your toes. No stress if you're not there yet. And then the U, you're going to come up, bring your arms straight up in the air, and then I want you to lean back. Look up at that ceiling. And then for your T, here's a great photo op, Shireen. At your T is you're going to put your arms out to the sides and do a little twist. And that's your coconut. And Shireen got a photo op, so that's super fun. I hope that all of you who are watching the recording as well, thank you, Nancy, I appreciate that. All of you who are watching the recording as well will do that. I hope you did that with us. Don't skip it. That was probably the most important thing any of us did today. Get a little oxygen into our cells, into our brains. All right, presenters, you can all turn your cameras back off again. And I'm going to cover just a couple of quick things, and then I'm going to turn it over to our interns, our intern Leah and another intern Stephanie in just a moment. But first, I want to talk for a minute about a frequently asked question we get at the office, and I have to get back to it here. There it is. And that question is, can I lose my license if I get arrested for protesting? Okay. This is a really important question, especially in the context of our current world. And peaceful protest is a really important part of our democracy. Now, I want you all to know that arrests do not need to be reported to the Board of Social Work. Licensees must report any convictions to the Board of Social Work that are, in quotes, reasonably related to social work practice. Okay, reasonably related to social work practice. Now, most of you are not protesting necessarily as part of your practice. We can never separate all of the things we do in our lives and say, I do this not as a social worker, I do this as a social worker. We are wearing our social work hat all of the time, right? But in my mind, you're not at work when you are protesting. So I don't think it's related to your social work practice. But if for some reason you did something and you were convicted for it, you would need to report that to the Board of Social Work within 90 days of the conviction and at your license renewal. Okay, so make sure that if you have some kind of conviction on your record that you let the Board of Social Work know. Now again, reasonably related is not defined in statute, but could include offenses that impair a social worker's ability to safely practice social work, may include things like theft or assault. If the Board of Social Work believes the conviction to be reasonably related to the practice of social work, then they may contact the licensee, so you, for more information to determine if the offense jeopardizes safe practice. Now, I have to say also, it is rare for a criminal conviction to result in disciplinary action from our board, and even more rare for a conviction to cause a loss of licensure. So I want to make sure you all heard that just because you have a criminal conviction does not mean that you will have disciplinary action by our board or lose your license. So there's a lot of misinformation out there in the world, and I really appreciate our colleagues at the Board of Social Work, Megan Gallagher, who's a JD, who helped answer these questions for us. So just quickly, a couple of upcoming events for students that I don't want to miss. We host every year multiple sessions of a virtual licensure exam prep. We do this because I don't want any of you to worry and fret and not feel prepared for your licensure exam. It's a really important part of the whole becoming a social worker thing, and it's also very stressful. And for people like me who have really bad test anxiety, the licensure exams can be a major source of stress. And so I want you all to feel prepared for that. So we have found what I believe is really the very best content out there with the very best materials for you, and we offer it multiple times a year at the most reasonable rate we can. And it's really good. And I swear to you that people who take this come back to us constantly and are like, thank you so much. That really helped me feel more prepared. And people pass. We have really high pass rates from people who've taken our course. So here are some of our upcoming dates. Shireen wanted to make sure that everyone heard that registration closes tomorrow at noon for our course on April 23rd, and we do have a few spots left in that session. And we have several spots left on the May 26th session and lots of spots left for the June session. So if you know you're not planning to take the exam until maybe later in the summer or upcoming even, I encourage you to get registered for those. We do have a limited capacity for each of those, and when we hit it, we have to close registration. So I encourage all the students in the audience and those of you watching to go ahead and get registered as soon as you can. I do have a Lunch and Learn webinar coming up on May 5th entitled, I Graduated, Now What? 5 Things Every New Social Worker Should Know. So we're going to be talking a bit about licensure and job search and all sorts of things that would be helpful to new social workers. So all of you students in the audience, I hope you'll join us for that. Now with that, hopefully everyone got a little bit of a brain break and you're ready for some additional content. I want to invite Leah and Stephanie to join me on our virtual stage here. Leah and Stephanie, let's see. There we are. Hi. Hi, folks. Now, we have 2 MSW interns with us today, both from MSU Mankato. Leah is our intern at NASW Minnesota, and Stephanie Nelson is an intern at the ARC Minnesota. And we asked both of these folks to join us to share a little bit about their learning and insights from their work as macro practice MSW interns. So welcome, Leah and Stephanie, and who's going first?
I'm going first.
Great.
My name is Stephanie, and like Karen mentioned, I'm an intern with the ARC Minnesota, and specifically with the Mid-State region, which includes St. Cloud and Stearns, Benton, Todd, and Morrison counties. So I've gotten to know a little more about that part of the state through this internship, which is awesome. I want to share about some of the things I've learned about community outreach and engagement, and some of the important things I've learned and steps to outreach that I hadn't identified before. Specifically, a project I helped work on was to get surveys out to people with disabilities to gather information about their access to technology during the pandemic. And the ARC knows that people were isolated and wanted to know more about their challenges in accessing and using technology during the pandemic. We all know that online platforms such as Zoom are becoming the main means of ways that people meet and get together during this pandemic, and it will also be an important way to continue to connect beyond this. And increasing access is very important for the ARC. So some things I've learned through this experience specifically is that first, it's crucial to learn about the agency that you work with and are supporting to be able to talk about it eloquently and represent it accurately. So it's important to be able to share specific information with those you're reaching out to, depending on who they are and what stake they have in the issue you're hoping to ask for help with. And understanding what will matter to them makes the request stronger. Next, it's important to have an outreach plan and break it up into smaller tasks. And as social workers, this is something we do a lot, making our SMART goals and breaking them up into tasks. So that can be applied to the macro level as well. And in this case of the technology survey that I helped with, this outreach plan was already made, so I just had my specific job to do in the mid-state region of getting that information out to community partners. On other projects, I'll set up this plan for myself. Another important step is finding relevant stakeholders in the community. And with the technology survey, I did this through existing agency contacts, people that were already in connection with the ARC. I also looked at online registries, Minnesota Info online, and through just Google searches. So then I reached out via email. I followed up over the phone, which was really effective, and having kind of both of those, especially while a lot of people are working remotely, was really important. And I also made sure to make note of responses and, be sure to follow up about future collaboration. So this is really setting the stage for other work I'll do at my internship in the future. As an advocacy organization like the ARC, it's important to get feedback from constituents and to listen to the experiences of those most impacted, which is why a lot of the projects I'll be doing, including this technology survey, that's why we do those, is to learn more what those people we want to support and whose rights we are defending and fighting for. Their voices are the ones that are heard. So that's a little about my macro level internship, and I would encourage everyone to give it a try if you're interested.
Thanks, Stephanie. So as Karen introduced, my name is Leah. I'm an intern with NASW Minnesota. Throughout my internship, I've had a lot of exposure to the many avenues of policy and advocacy work, but I'm going to talk briefly about my experiences with watching policymaking at the Minnesota Legislature. So I've spent a decent amount of my time watching legislative hearings. To be honest, they can get long and boring and sometimes frustrating to watch. And I'm not always seeing a clear link between the bills being heard and the social work profession, which is one of my goals to assess as I'm listening to the hearings. So I would be using my assessment skills, looking at the impacts of the policy, who it benefits, who it harms, and other implications that it has. So, this is to say I don't think of policy work necessarily as particularly glamorous, but I have felt really excited seeing important bills pass through a committee to get a floor vote in the House or Senate. And I have felt empowered and inspired by watching folks testify and share their stories throughout the hearings. So while I wouldn't recommend that everyone spend their time watching legislative hearings, I think there are interesting and inspiring things to find in following policies at the legislature. So with that said, I don't think that policy work necessarily needs to be getting down in the trenches with policymakers, such as at the legislature. And if there's an issue or policy that you're interested in or passionate about, there are steps that you can take to do policy work. My colleague Cassie, a fellow intern at NASW Minnesota, she's not able to join us today, but she did give me permission to share a little bit about her introduction to policy work. She spent some time creating a one-pager on trickle-down theory, which is published on the blog on the NASW Minnesota Policy Info and Action page. She was interested in learning more about trickle-down economics, researched it, learned its impacts, who it benefits and harms, and what implications it has, and then created a one-pager. She said prior to this, she felt intimidated by policy work, but after doing it, she's felt empowered, much like I have. So I think overall, we learned how to do policy work as social work students, and whether we're in the depths of the Minnesota legislature or researching policies that we care about or are interested in, all policy work that social workers do is important at every level.
Awesome insights. Thank you so much, Leah and Stephanie, for spending a couple of minutes with us this morning. I do think it's really helpful. I love, Leah, and your sort of like watching the work being done is not as it's not as exciting as you might think it is, right? A lot of it's boring. Like you have to listen to people have conversations about stuff at length. And as Stephanie's talking about, like the work is hard, our macro stuff, and like trying to do all of the thinking behind the scenes of organizations and programs, and there's a lot happening. And so I think for all of the direct practice folks in the room, I think it's really helpful to just hear some insights from you on some of the things that you're working on, and also help us all just frame our work in the importance of policy work and just incorporating it in even little ways in our day-to-day work as well. So thanks so much, Leah and Stephanie, for being with us this morning. Next up, I just want to share with our audience, just in case there's any potential interns out there, that we are at NASW Minnesota seeking MSW macro concentration interns for next year. We're looking for one intern on the leadership and management focus side, and the other to be focused more on policy advocacy, as Leah is. We are offering next year a $2,000 stipend for each of our interns, and I do hope, hear me, I do hope that sets a precedent along with some of our other agencies that we are joining in this pool of folks that are offering a stipend to our interns. I believe we have to put our money where our mouth is, and when we talk about social workers being paid what they're worth and getting the credit where credit's due for the contributions that we make on our multidisciplinary teams and on our social work teams, interns are contributing a lot to our organizations, and we need to be giving them credit for that. So that is our way of doing what we can in our NASW Minnesota budget to set that expectation out there for ourselves as well. So with that, we are going to, we're going to have a couple other presenters up next. So I want to welcome Nora and Beth to join me up here if they're able to. And right after Nora and Beth, we're going to have Jenny Arneson come back and talk with us about several of the workforce issues that we are following at NASW Minnesota this session. So there is some big stuff happening that we have not talked about yet this morning around telehealth and all sorts of workforce related things, some of which is moving and some of which is stalled and whatnot. But I really want to make sure that folks hang on to hear that update from Jenny as well. And we'll do a few closing things. So in our last 14 minutes, lots still to cover, but I want to turn it over for just a minute or two to Beth and Nora, who are going to talk a little bit about, so we were just talking about the interns' experience of advocacy work and macro practice work. And we wanted to hear from a couple of real life social workers also about your real world experience of putting together direct practice and advocacy roles. So take it away, Nora and Beth.
Hi there, everybody. So I wanted to actually start with my favorite quote here. It says, "If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." As social workers, we hold power, and this requires great conscious intention daily on how we hold and use that power. To avert becoming part of the problem, it is important for social workers to not just do what they are told. Social work changes amidst the changing status of culture, politics, laws, and economy. However, obedience to justice should persevere throughout these transitions. Our work is dynamic. It is not adherence to a system of formal policy statements. Please set the intention to practice social work as being part of a social movement. Influence change. Do not be held back by the constraints of formalized organization and the inbuilt inertia of institutionalization. Do not let the focus on outcomes simply serve the purpose of meeting demands of funders. Do not sell the process of social work down the river. Do not allow the desire for an increased salary or other benefits that come with professionalization distance you from those you serve. Stay centered on the interests you share with those you serve. Justice is always under attack, and we can do something as individuals and as a collective. Go back to our social work roots based in volunteerism. We are tasked with social work for social justice principles that demand we take action and guide our service. I have a call to action right now in this moment. I want you to please consider utilizing SPAN, Social Policy Action Network as an opportunity to connect with each other and grow our collective impact for advocacy. Today, that can be as simple as taking 1 minute out of your day to contact Karen or Beth and letting them know you want to serve. Right now, as I am speaking, you can do this. Just send an email that says you want to join SPAN. That's all you have to do right now. Please don't let anything hold you back. If you are a student or if you are retired or anything in between, I am talking to you, all of you. There are hundreds of you. How many of you will rise up right now today? I know we are all busy as direct practice social workers, but I promise you will somehow find the time for social justice. It is too important to stand by. And as social workers, we simply cannot sustain our social justice values if we do not prioritize making the time. And you don't need to have all the answers. You just have to show up as you are. SPAN doesn't need your help. We need your awareness that we are all in this together and your intentional commitment to join us. So right now, if you haven't already, send your request by joining. Send that email and let us know that you want to act, come together, organize, and advocate. Let us work together.
Beth, are you unmuted?
Beth, we can't hear you, Beth. Nope. Well, looking at the time, I'm sure Beth has lots of great things to say, as she always does, but Beth has talked to you all this morning already. So, and I think Nora said it. I mean, y'all, we got to do this work, and we're called to do it. She said it way more eloquently than I did, and I have to say, Nora, there's all kinds of people in the chat going, "Oh, we need those words. Like, that is some powerful stuff. Like, we all need to be at this table together." So I really appreciate you sharing that inspiration for us, Nora, this morning. With that, I want to move us along to just one last comment, and then I'm going to bring up Jenny Arneson to close us with one set of policy efforts that we're working on. And just to follow up with what Nora was saying, in addition to thinking about your work in combining advocacy with your practice, I want you to also think about running for office. Research shows that we have to be asked like 7 to 10 times before we decide to run for office. So here's your first ask, or maybe your 5th or your 10th. There's lots of resources out there to help you on that journey, to help you think about how this works and how do I even get started in thinking about it. And I hope you heard today from even just a couple of elected officials that we did hear from. They're just regular people who know some things about some issues and not things about other issues. And we can't be those people who wait until we know all of it to be the people at the table. So I encourage each of you to run, and I hope that one of your to-dos today is to also take a minute and either call or email or send a thoughtful handwritten note to a friend or colleague that you think would be a great legislator or a great person on school board or a great person on city council or something, and say to them, you should run for office. You should think about, we all need to keep putting those words into one another's heads as we go along our way. So with that, I want to give Jenny a few minutes, and Jenny will just need 1 minute, like at the very end, to do a little wrap up, but I would turn it over to you to talk about all the workforce issues you've been working on.
Thanks so much. And I am going to, I'm going to start with these slides here, Karen, but then at the end, what we'll do is go back and to some previous slides where we can talk about where you can find more information about all of these issues, because this is meant to be an informative event, but you don't want to wait once a year to get all your information about policy. And there are some really easy places that you can go and make sure that you're informed about this. So thanks again for having me here. I'm going to talk a little bit about where social work as a profession is showing up at the Capitol this year. We have the original Practice Act was passed in 1987, but it was not, you might think it's one and done, but it's not. That's not how policy works. Policy isn't meant to just kind of be passed and sit there. As our community evolves, as our values evolve, we want policy to adapt. And so as a result, in our legislative agenda, NASW does support licensing, but we also support improvements, ways to make it better and to better reflect what we are wanting to see as a social work profession. And there are several proposals that speak directly to that. So I'll let you go to the next slide, Karen. Okay, so the first one is, I'm calling it the Supporting a Diverse Workforce Bill. We have the numbers here on that, if you are one who likes to track those numbers. So we know that the BIPOC community is underrepresented in the social work profession. And because of this shortage, people in the BIPOC community do not have adequate access to practitioners from their own community. Furthermore, there are no continuing education requirements for clinicians or for social work practitioners on cultural competency or racial equity. So we in our legislative agenda, we do support these. There's some specific language in this bill that is on our legislative agenda. Specifically, this bill would require 6 hours of continuing education that is rooted specifically in diversity and equity and inclusion. It creates a loan forgiveness program for BIPOC social workers who pursue specifically in LGSW who are working in the mental health profession, as well as a couple other provisions. I will note that this has Representative Herr carried this bill in the House and it got support, and it is included in the omnibus bill, which is that House File 2127. However, it's gotten very little attention in the Senate. Senator Yuki carried the bill, but it hasn't received a hearing, and it is really just no interest. And so what that means at this point, it is a very narrow path forward. What would need to happen is we would need really a champion at the Senate level who would really push leadership to include that in conference committees and kind of a roundabout way. So if this isn't a bill that interests you and you would like to advocate for it, you should focus your effort on the Senate at this point. All right, so let's go to the next slide. We have a couple of bills that are very specific for clinical social workers. One is the Telehealth Act. This is a big deal because to many clinicians, as you likely know, during COVID, practitioners were allowed to provide services via telehealth. They were allowed to provide services over the phone and over the screen, as we're talking here today. And this bill would make those changes permanent. I think we have found a lot of benefits to that, and this would continue those options. And it does eliminates some limits on how often you're able to do that. So the big deal with this bill has wide support. It has bipartisan support. It is moving at both the House and Senate level, and I do believe it's headed towards passage. That said, the big debate at this bill is all about parity. It's all about this discussion: should we be paid? Should social workers be paid the same rate if they're providing the service in person or if they're providing it via telehealth? Currently in the bill, and the lawmakers are supportive of parity, of paying people the same rate, but there are insurance companies who are advocating very strongly for the rates to be less for the telehealth if you're via telehealth. The problem with that, and they see that as an avenue to save money and to make healthcare affordable. This is not something that we support. So what you can do to support this bill is just to encourage your representative to stay strong and to continue to support this bill, and that you would appreciate parity, it's the same amount of prep work, it's the same amount of work serving a client, regardless of the format that we see them. And then the second bill is called Uniform Service Standards. This is a pretty large and complex bill, so I'm not going to go too in depth with this, but why this bill matters, and it is actually moving. It is in the House omnibus bill as well, and the Senate, so this is actually moving forward as well. But the big deal about this bill is it puts it all in one place, mental health professionals, and it reestablishes social workers among mental health professionals. So this reaffirms that original licensing law was passed back in 1987. This does have some specific things for licensing for particular behavioral health settings, and you can read about those as well. I will mention that I do have, there are policy briefs, a one-pager on all 4 of these bills that I'm talking about here today in the resources provided to you, so you can read more about that. So we're just going to monitor this one. It's moving forward, and it will likely actually come back again next year. And so the final bill that I want to talk about is related to school social workers. School social workers have shown up in a couple of different ways. And I mentioned at the very beginning of this program that the House and Senate have taken extraordinarily different approaches to education this year. The House is proposing a pretty significant investment in public schools, and the Senate is proposing putting most of their resources into a voucher system. So funding for this it will vary. But what is the current issue is that school social workers, the LIC-SWs, though they are providing mental health services to students, they are not being paid for that. Instead, and it's due to a variety of a complex billing system. So instead, what's happening is local school districts are covering that cost, which is contributing to a funding gap in schools that we call the special education cross subsidy. So this bill will address that issue. It actually doesn't come with any cost to the state. It would seem to be a no-brainer, but there is some resistance to this because it does involve some pretty significant changes from the DHS system. Yet we think this is extremely important because, of course, one of our core issues, the point of our original Practice Act, was to recognize the work that social workers do. We've done to recognize the credentials of social work, and it also provides protections for our clients by providing us a system of accountability. So when in fact we have social workers whose work is not being recognized, it is really important to our profession that we stand with them and say that they have the same qualifications as other clinicians and ought to be paid accordingly. So because this is not moving at all in the Senate, your advocacy efforts should be focused on the Senate at this point. So lastly, what I'm going to do is I'd like to go back to the slides earlier that talk a little bit about where you can find more information. We have very limited time, and you might want to know more about any of these issues, and you might want to explore in depth. Other than the news, there are a couple of places that you can look. One, if you just Google the legislature, mn.leg, the Minnesota House and Senate has their own media services, and they put out daily briefs, particularly the House does. And they do a really fantastic job of summarizing the key topics of the day. So and you can subscribe and get their own publications. You can also go to Social Work Speaks, which is the national organization. And then lastly, we put together a great resource that is available to our members, and that's shown on the next slide, if you wouldn't mind. And we're calling it, it's an online policy info tool for NASW members. You can see it on the main page on the top left slide there. It's under Advocacy. You can see where you can find the drop-down menu, and it has a variety of different features on it. One, we have statements from partners. So TakeAction is on there, or Homes for All as our partners sum up action alerts. We post them on there. Second, we've got our own policy briefs, which are shared in your folder, but you can find them throughout the session as well. We also have some articles and other sources. So Leah mentioned that Cassie wrote a one-pager on the trickle-down theory. That's really helpful if you wanted to talk about taxes with your representative. You can find that on our blog. And finally, the search tool there, if you wanted to type in GLBTQI bills, for example, and because you wanted to know the number of Representative Hollins bills, you can just type in a topic in this area, and you will see all the bills that have been introduced related to that issue, whatever the issue is, housing, any of these issues, child welfare, whatever captured your interest today. So it's a really great tool and available to members. And with that, I think we're pretty much over time, so I am going to stop and turn it over to Karen.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And while I'm clicking ahead, I'm going to invite Kenny Turk to join me up here for some closing comments about NASW generally. And I know Shireen said in the chat to everyone that we will be running a few minutes over. And so if people have to go, we totally understand, but we do have a few more just closing things that we want to share with you about NASW that I think are really important for us to share with everyone as well. So, you know, before we talk about the sort of the last next steps in our advocacy work, I need to take a moment and make sure you all know that your choosing to join NASW and renew each year absolutely matters. It was our growing membership that allowed us to hire Jenny Arneson, our legislative consultant who works on all of our behalf every day with our legislators and paying attention to these issues. And I'm thrilled that as one of the fastest growing chapters in the country, that growth and our hard work as a chapter has enabled us to double her contract for next year. So if you think we're really on it this year, just wait. There's so much more happening in years to come. You know, one of the big purposes of a professional organization is a collective lobbying voice. And our collective social work voice brings hope. It unites social workers so we can advocate together for social justice and change. And advocating for the profession and the issues we care about is core to us. And as you're hearing from Jenny, you know, we didn't put that last on the agenda because it's not important, but in my mind, it like caps off everything else, that if we are not advocating for our profession, no one else is. And we need to be at that table and strong. So I want to invite Kenny to share some insights about some thoughts on why membership is important.
Thanks, Karen, and thanks everybody for sticking around. I've been an NASW Minnesota member for 13 years, and at first, when I became a member, I was a student, and I didn't understand why I should become a member, and there was all sorts of reasons why people were kind of thrown out there. But I heard an analogy, kind of like a gym membership, and that you can use your gym membership or not, and you get the results from using your gym membership or not. And liken that to being a member of NASW. And I think that that's been really powerful metaphor for me, because I've been able to serve on the board. I've been able to serve on a number of committees, and being a member allows you access. It's a conduit for you to be at the table, to be not only to learn about policy and legislation and practice and policy implications, but to actually be part of that process. And I think it's really evident over the last year for many people why that's so important. And so I want you to invite you to kind of consider looking at your NASW membership as a backstage pass, as an opportunity for you to get involved and to participate. And even if it's just to learn, it's like, well, I don't know, I've never done anything like that before. That's okay, because there's a lot of people that are willing to mentor, that are willing to guide. And so please understand that your membership really matters right now, and you're being active, like some of the other folks have talked about earlier. It's just so important for you to get involved and to be active, and you have this pass to be able to do that with your NASW membership. So again, thanks for coming to the Advocacy Day online. It's really important also, and just for being part of the day, both professionals and students, social workers across the gamut. We're social workers before we're clinicians, we're social workers before we're policy advocates, we're social workers together, and that's why it's really important for us to be together in this, and we'll have a much greater impact. So thanks again for being here.
Awesome. Thanks for those words, Kenny. I really appreciate it. You know, folks, I hear from people all the time, like, what is NASW doing about this? Or why don't you make a statement about that? And I say to folks, so what do you want us to say? What's the statement? Because remember, we are NASW. Every one of us collectively, it's a membership association. I'm a member also. We only have 2 staff. Most of the work, the bulk, we have so much work, right? So much of the work happens through all of these volunteer leaders and social workers who are at the table, who want our profession to be strong, who want the voice of our profession to be at that table. So no one can undermine our ability to do clinical practice, that people actually know that social workers are doing policy because it's in our code of ethics and we care about these things. Like we have to be actively out there doing it if we want our profession to be strong. So I hope that you will all follow Kenny's lead and calling yourself a social worker. We have title protection in Minnesota and you should use that. And I say to folks all the time, I'm a macro practice social worker who happens to run an organization. That's my job. But I'm not an executive director first. I'm a social worker first. That's my core. Now, that's our really brief sales pitch. There's so much more we could say, but I want to ask every one of you to seriously consider joining or renewing your NASW membership ASAP. We are absolutely stronger together. If you're a student, please consider joining before you graduate. It's only $60 for a year as a student. And then you get a slowed increase rate for 2 years post-graduation before you pay the full member rate. So check out our website, naswmn.socialworkers.org, to learn more about all the benefits of membership. But knowing that someone and many people actually are advocating on your behalf, both in Minnesota and nationally, every day, as a member of our awesome profession, I think is worth contributing to, and I hope you all do too. So to stay in touch with us, I just wanted to put up joinnasw.org is how you join us. We are a national association, so you join national and then you get membership in your local chapter. There's our information. If you haven't already emailed me, which I'm already seeing emails coming in from some of you, thank you so much who are interested in joining us and getting active in some of our committees. You can also email our general admin NASW-MN email address with any general questions, that sort of thing. Follow us on all of these social media channels as well. And in terms of next steps, you heard at least a million next steps today throughout all of the presenters. So I encourage you to check out that virtual resources folder if you haven't already. We're continuing throughout the morning as people are asking for things. We're adding more things into that resource folder as well. Think about those areas of passion that were piqued for you today. Contact your legislators. If you don't know who they are, figure it out. Contact them. Send them a note today. Also post on your social media, tag your reps, say you were at today, you're pumped about this area of work that's either moving or stalled at the Capitol and you care about it. Put that on your social media today. Talk to your colleagues, your friends, your family. Think about running for office. Remember my note to encourage someone else to run for office today as well. Be sure to complete our event evaluation by, looks like April 21st, so we'll have it open for a week. And please look for our session recap webinar sometime in June. As soon as we have a sense of when the session might end, we will get that scheduled. So a couple of closing comments. First, I have to thank our fantastic SPAN committee, each of the presenters and the elected officials who shared their time and insights with us today. And a very special thanks to our legislative consultant, Jenny Arneson, our SPAN chair, Beth Winterfelt, and our intern, Leah Hansen, and our chapter coordinator, Shireen Retta, for all that they did to make this a great event once again. The recording, as we've said, will be up on YouTube by the end of this week. It may be there earlier, but just in case, we have to say by the end of this week, please pass the word along to others who might be interested in learning about all the things that we discussed today. The CEU for today is in the event materials, Google Docs folder. And a reminder to anyone who watches this on YouTube, you can count the hours as independent study CEUs. So independent study CEUs, really important, folks. You can, in any regular year, you can collect half of your CEUs through independent study. So use that when you're reading things, watching things, paying attention to the world around you, doing that sort of study stuff all of us social workers do all the time. Count that as independent study. And send me a note if you want some more information about what counts and how to track it. In closing, now is the time to advocate. Remember at the beginning of today when I said that if you sit and listen, but you don't do something, we are absolutely not going to move forward. Legislators need to hear from each and every one of you. Email or call them today. Tell them you're a constituent. Remember that. We've heard that a couple times this morning. Tell them of the issues and bills that you care about. And then put their contact information into your phone. I know you have it like sitting right there with you folks. As you look up your legislators, put their contact information, their legislative assistant, or however their website says to contact them, put that into your phone. So when you see something, you can say something. Stay in touch with them. Ensure legislators from all over Minnesota know that social workers are paying attention, that we are great resources on all sorts of issues, and that we're willing to work for social justice. Now, all my best to each of you in the heart-heavy days ahead. I want to thank you so much for joining us today and for being essential in our world. I appreciate you all and send you great vibes for the days ahead. All my best, and thanks again for being here today. Take care, folks.